Pirates fishing Saitama Constitution Chapter 21-40. Chapter 21 Escaped Blackbeard. At the entrance of Dragon Palace. Chenmu looked at the closed shimon, the corners of his eyes kept beating, at this moment. A huge black flying axe spun through the 2 layers of bubbles in Dragon Palace City, and shot towards the northeast. Chenmu stared at the flying axe that passed quickly, and was dazed. This scene is a bit familiar. When I remember it, this is the baba fruit of Van Deeken. His goal, the hard-shell tower of Princess Shirahoshi. However, the system beat sounded, interrupting Chenmu's memories. Ding! Whitebeard's 6th Division Captain Bramank was killed in action, the bag fruit was successfully plundered by the Blackbeard pirates, and the supply of marine supplies medicines was cut off. Close black lens bracket. Ding! The influence of the Whitebeard pirates is declining. Close black lens bracket. Ding! A large number of pirates are coming, and the crisis index of Fishman Island is rising, please prepare your host. Close black lens bracket. This series of prompt sounds kept reverberating in his mind, making Chenmu completely stunned. Is the Whitebeard pirates already so weak? With the death of a logistics captain, the deterrent effect is gone. Empty, full of ambition, spit, no place to vent. Chenmu can't wait to lift the table. Chenmu himself became angrier the more he thought about it, and the more he thought about it, the more angry he became, and in the end he almost clenched his teeth. Don't I just want to be a little bit more Buddhist and let Luffy take over Whitebeard's power slowly? I've only just been lazy for a day, so you force me to make progress. Good. Hello system. Well, you Blackbeard, if I let you have a beard left today, I'll consider you clean. Vivi bowed, and after a short charge, it burst through the bubble, turned into a yellow flash, and went straight to the sea. At this time, somewhere in the dark trench, Hody Jones looked gloomy and came to Van Deeken's ship with a group of cadres. Captain, here comes Captain Hody of the New Fishman Pirates. The crew looked at the uninvited New Fishman Pirates with fear, and subconsciously tightened their weapons. Oh, Van Deeken's puzzled voice came from the cabin, and he continued, Hody. Dang tilde, the sound of stepping on the stairs sounded. With his mustache in his left hand, Van Deeken walked out of the cabin leisurely. Ha, Captain Hody, we meet again, ha, tilde. Van Deeken's Drake-like laughter echoed across the boat. Hearing the cheerful laughter of others, Hody Jones couldn't help but turn gloomier, with a flash of coldness in his eyes, and said to the person, Dakin, the plan is ahead of schedule, I will attack Dragon Palace immediately. Hearing this, Vivi's eyes narrowed, and he looked at Hody and his party with disdain. Except for Hody Jones, almost all the other fishmen were injured, and all parts of his body were also wrapped in white bandages. You guys are like this now. Re just going to die, go back, ha, tilde. Van Deeken had a sarcastic look on his face, mocking Hody unscrupulously. After speaking, he turned around and went back to the cabin to rest. After all, he had already proposed to Shirahoshi today, and he was too lazy to use his abilities again. New Fishman Pirate Group had a flash of red light in their eyes, and the breathing of the whole group became inexplicably heavy. Hody Jones was even more direct, his body swooped forward, leapt over Dakin's crew, and rushed forward. Hody's eyes flashed violent red light, and he held down his head, making Van Deeken's face slammed into his own boat. Captain! Everyone exclaimed, and they drew their weapons and rushed to Hody. Clang! The octopus swordsman Leopard Zhang, who had only 6 legs left, flashed with a dazzling sword light wrapped in it. The people who were cut in the waist didn't have time to step forward, their bodies suddenly froze, their upper body was straight and fell towards the front, and then, their eyes went black, and there was no breath of life. Leopard hide. His subordinates were all beheaded in an instant, Van Dyke's eyes were red, and he roared. The fingernails of both hands were deeply buckled into the rotten deck, and white sawdust splashed around. But Hody Jones' palm pressed him firmly. There was no pity in his eyes, and he said coldly, "Do you hear it now?" Damn! Vendy Deacon struggled violently in his heart, and the hatred in his heart was about to overflow. "Okay, I'll do it." Hody Cold Isho withdrew his hand and took a step back, then raised his foot, kicked Dakin hard in the abdomen, kicked him off the boat, and said, "Your boat. I want it." After Van Deacon flew upside down for a distance, he gradually slowed down and swam towards his own boat with a blank expression. Swimming to the stern, a trace of hatred flashed in Van Deacon's eyes. He took off the red glove on his right hand and threw it back. The right hand stretched forward and touched the wooden board at the stern of the boat. After Vivi charged up, he pushed hard. The rotten sailboat was slowly pulled out from the bottom of the sea, and Van Deacon waved a palm again. The hull of the ship shook suddenly, accelerated instantly, and galloped towards the direction of Dragon Palace City. Hody Jones took out a few murderous medicines again and threw them into his mouth, and everyone behind him followed suit. The whole ship is full of tyrannical breath. Hody's arrogant laughter, accompanied by the sailing boat, gradually disappeared in this dark and deep sea. On the other side, a yellow figure broke through the sea instantly. Due to inertia, Chen Yu continued to fly high in the sky after rushing out of the sea. When he reached a height of nearly 100 meters, the momentum slowly stopped, and the whole person began to fall rapidly towards the sea. Boom! With a loud bang, Chen Yu, who was holding a mirror, smashed heavily onto the deck of a huge warship. At the prompt of the sniper Van Oka, the Blackbeards were already ready to fight. Before Chen Yu could stand up straight, several sharp blades slashed on his bald head in an instant. Dang dang tilde. There was a sound like a sharp blade slashing on the rock, and everyone was shocked by this anti-shock force one after another. But the offensive of the Blackbeard pirates did not stop there. Blackbeard Teach jumped over the heads of everyone, and the dark aura on his right hand spun rapidly and shot towards the top of Chen Mu's head. Chen Mu was still in a half-squatting posture, raised his head, and with a face full of anger, he kicked the Blackbeard fiercely. A burst of transparent ripples swayed, passing over everyone. All the villains were trembling all over, and a trace of fear flashed in their eyes. And the Blackbeard fell directly from the air, and after landing, his whole body trembled. Deterioration of everyone in front of him, the sharp light in Chen Mu's eyes gradually faded, and he said to himself, "As conqueror so useful, or they are too weak." Chen Mu first pulled his right foot out of the pothole on the deck, followed by his left foot. Turning his head and turning his waist, he warmed up by himself. Blackbeard and the others also slowly recovered, and cautiously stepped backwards, fearing to disturb this familiar stranger. Chen Mu didn't seem to care about the movements of the crowd. He still warmed up to himself, pressing his legs for a while, and shaking his shoulders for a while. Blackbeard and his party moved gently to the edge of the boat, and glanced at the Moby Dick, ready to jump up and escape at any time. Blackbeard Teach hid behind everyone, winked at everyone who turned to look at him, smiled evilly, and his face instantly turned hideous and terrifying. Dark cave, Blackbeard roared. The hands slammed down suddenly, and the place where they touched instantly turned into a black hole, and spread to the surrounding at an extremely fast speed. All the places covered by darkness slowly sank, including Chen Mu's feet. Everyone put their swords back into their sheaths, carried their spears on their shoulders, turned around, and jumped away towards the Moby Dick, not far away. The actions of the Blackbeard crew made Chen Mu stunned. "Is this selling teammates?" 3 words could not help but appear in his mind. He was often annoyed by these 3 words before. Returning to his thoughts, Chen Mu saw that the tall mainmast had already tilted more than halfway, and he was in the center of the dark swamp, and the black swamp had swept over his waist. Chen Mu just frowned a little unhappily, showing a little disgust. However, when he raised his head and looked at Blackbeard, he found that the man was gone. Chen Mu was stunned for a moment, with a question mark on his head. he looked left and right, but he couldn't see anyone. At this moment, an eager roar sounded in the distance and entered Chen Emu's ears. "I'm trapped in him, hurry up and hurry up." The corners of his mouth twitched, and he complained disdainfully, "This coward." Looking far away, the white whale-shaped Moby Dick gradually moved away, while the huge warship that stayed on the sea gradually began to dissolve, until it was completely sucked into the huge black vortex. On the azure sea, a black vortex was still slowly rotating and did not disappear. Bang! A figure suddenly jumped out of the black vortex. The vortex exploded immediately, and the surrounding waves were splashed dozens of meters high. After a short lift-off, the seawater crashed down from the sky and returned to the magnificent sea. But Chen Mu, who broke through the darkness, disappeared without a trace. On the sea, the Moby Dick. The group of Blackbeards, who escaped from birth, lay limp on the deck, looking at the few white clouds slowly drifting in the sky. They couldn't help but sigh. It's good to be alive. The new captain of the Moby Dick, Badgers, held the rudder and sailed into the distance, but from time to time he would turn his head to look at the people behind him with an indescribably weird expression. Is there anything like that? Everyone was locked up in Impel Down. They had made obvious progress, and they would not be unable to resist the attack of his, as before. Thinking of this, Badgers stared blankly at the tall figure in front of him. Sun Yuan Wolf, the 180-meter-high ceiling of the pirate world, was carrying two thick ropes, acting as a puller. The boatman is swimming hard in front. Like that, I believe you say there is something to eat later. Can't help but sigh again. As for it. Boom. It was a familiar voice, a familiar vibration. Chen Mu smashed his feet into the deck again, and Blackbeard and the others all trembled, jumping up in a hurry, their faces full of horror. What the hell is going on with this man? Can't even the dark acupuncture hold him down? Chen Mu slowly raised his head, his eyes narrowed slightly, and he showed a harmless smile to the panicked crowd. Hey, I got you, teach. Chapter 22 Feet Disappearing, Blackbeard. Facing Chen Emu's kind smile, Blackbeard's group only felt chills down their backs, and an indescribable terror spread in their hearts. Throat. Chen Mu held Jinghua Shuiyu in his left hand and rested his right hand on his knees. He slowly stood up straight and walked towards the crowd step by step. Although he didn't have any momentum, the inexplicable oppression made everyone back again and again in shock. No Conqueror Haki was released this time, and everyone could still think for a while, but the body would tremble uncontrollably. Hybrid slumped on the ground, pointed at Chen Mu with one hand, and moved back with the other, dragging his unsatisfactory body, looking overly frightened. Vivi twitched at the corner of Chen Emu's mouth, and complained in his heart. Didn't he beat you once? That was 2 years ago. How to say he wants to be the fourth emperor, and that's all it takes. Chen Mu just absolutely beat them up lightly at the beginning, but he doesn't know how Blackbeard got here in the past 2 years. It was the fist of the big bald Saitama. Although it didn't have a full level, it was the most terrifying disaster for him who felt double the pain. Chased by this guy again, I can't help but think of the 2 years of prison life. Obviously the number of people on the two sides is not equal, but the scene does show a one-sided situation. Chen Mu took a step forward, and everyone trembled and took a step back. Chen Mu looked at the panic-stricken crowd, and was very bored. Suddenly, Vivi's eyes narrowed, and he looked at Shiryu in the crowd. For nothing else, I just wanted to see if the cigar that was about to burn out would burn his mouth. If it gets hot, it would be a tribute to the famous scene of a big anchor. Chen Emu's bad taste suddenly rose in his heart, and he couldn't help but, Isho. His gaze turned to Blackbeard and the others. Shiryu of the rain behind Blackbeard's right side. Vivi lowered his head, his expression completely covered by the shadow of the brim of his hat, holding the red asterisk. His left hand was gradually oozing with sweat, his right metacarpal knuckle was stiff, and he wanted to grab the knife several times. Handle, but always retracted his hand at the moment of touching it. He was afraid. He questioned his partner who had been with him for many years. As a swordsman, he actually began to feel distrustful of his partner. This is an emotion that a swordsman should not have. Although he tried hard to dispel such ridiculous thoughts, Chen Emu's figure appeared in his mind again and again, shattering his beliefs. Chen Mu said that he was very innocent. He almost never beat Shiryu. As for why it left him such a big psychological shadow, then the system is to blame. It must be the top conqueror hockey set by the system, the sequelae left behind. The man surnamed Chen expressed a little guilty conscience and muttered in his heart that he should use it less in the future. This feeling is like hitting a child. Sin. Lafitte, who was tall and thin, wore a black top hat and a printed white shirt, hid the purple-red cane behind his back, and the right hand behind him held the cane and slowly began to spin. As the cane turned faster and faster, the expression on his face gradually became more confident, as if he was holding a winning ticket. Chen Emu's figure stopped abruptly, and looked at the pale man with a strange look, looking forward to his means. After all, in the plot of the previous life, Lafitte appeared in the Shichibukai meeting hosted by Sengoku, and finally succeeded in winning the Shichibukai title for Blackbeard. To say that he has little ability, Chen Mook would not believe it. Catherine Diame, who was wearing a purple-red robe, stood behind Lafitte, and naturally noticed this partner's strange movements, and gradually understood after a little thought. The red lips that were originally closed also gradually rose, and the 9 pink plush foxtails gradually revealed. Between seemingly unintentional waving, wisps of pink mist gradually dispersed, slowly moving in the direction of Chen Mu. Float away. Chen Mu turned his eyes slightly and glanced at the swaggering 9 foxtails. Is it mythical, S9-tailed fox form? Haha, it's getting more and more interesting. Chen Mu folded his arms around his chest, looking at the crowd with all his leisure. Gradually, the pink mist completely covered Chen Emu's figure. Lafitte stepped out of the crowd with a bold and confident expression, stood 3 meters away from Chen Mu, and raised the rotating cane above her head. Then, with a sudden grip, the cane stopped turning instantly, thrust a pestle in front of him, and inserted it straight into the deck in front of Chen Mu. Lafitte raised her head and laughed arrogantly, spreading her arms without any hesitation, as if Chen Mu in front of him was already a dead person, without any threat. Except for Shiryu, who was still in the penalty stand, everyone made the strongest attack. Like when they attacked Whitebeard at the beginning, everyone deceived them, and all the attacks hit the defenseless Chen Mu. The scene fell silent. Done. Everyone was overjoyed and couldn't hide their excitement. Huh. A light laughter sounded, and the smiles of Blackbeard and the others froze instantly. It seems not as exciting as I thought. As soon as Chen Emu's voice fell, the fog that was condensed and did not disperse was instantly shaken away. Looking at the unscathed figure in yellow, everyone's fear that had been suppressed in their hearts fluctuated violently again. Blackbeard was dumbfounded, his forehead was gradually covered with fine beads of sweat, and his expression was extremely frightened. Escape. Everyone trembled in their hearts, made a choice in an instant, turned around and jumped, abandoned the boat again and fled without a trace of memory. After all, a ship is nothing compared to a life. Hee, I just remembered to leave now, won't it be too late? Whoosh. There was a sound of breaking wind, and Chen Emu's figure instantly disappeared in place. Blackbeard and the others who were in the air moved their ears and turned their heads one after another. Seeing that they disappeared into the shadows, their hearts suddenly thumped, and the sound of swallowing saliva sounded one after another. Done. As soon as everyone thought about it, before they had time to turn around, they were kicked back to the boat by Chen Mu, who suddenly appeared. Boom, boom, boom. Figures smashed down one after another, smashing the hard deck into potholes, and sawdust flying. Chen Mu fell down lightly and stood quietly on the deck, looking at the potholes in front of him, his brows furrowed tightly. Wrong. Chen Emu's eyes suddenly froze. There is already a conjecture in mind. When he stepped hard with his right foot, the entire hull sank in half in an instant, and then rebounded instantly with the help of the buoyancy of the sea. The beluga smashed down violently, shaking violently, and the waves splashed several meters high. Chen Emu's feet seemed to be nailed to the deck, and his body did not move at all. The whole deck was shattered, and looking at the cabin full of wooden debris but no one was there, Chen Emu's eyes shone with a suffocating cold light. Ran. Can you run? Chen Mu was really angry this time. The eyes that were glowing with cold light closed instantly, and a burst of transparent fluctuations instantly rippled, exploring the deep sea below. There was a slight humming sound, and there were ripples on the sea. The slightly wet and salty sea breeze blew Chen Emu's white cloak, and without the huge giant Sanyuan wolf pulling the boat, the Moby Dick floated slowly in the sea, traveling very slowly. Minutes passed by. Chen Emu's eyes suddenly opened, and he looked seriously at somewhere in the deep sea. Chen Mu jumped into the air, and put Jinghua Shuiyu into the system space. The whole person smashed into the sea with a posture of head and feet, and rushed towards a huge figure that was swimming rapidly. Chen Mu has the top 3-color hockey, and it is impossible for such a group of scumbags to slip away from his eyes in the blink of an eye. His observation hockey is definitely faster than Blackbeard and others, but why did he search carefully for a long time, and even the red marker on the system map disappeared? This surprised him. Sanyuan Wolf, who had never joined the battle, fleeing frantically somewhere on the bottom of the sea, a trace of doubt arose in his heart. First of all, Blackbeard Teach and the ant who has the title of the strongest girl thief, are both devil fruit ability users, and diving sports must be unrelated to them. It makes sense for other people to dive in the deep sea, but these two goods must float up after entering the sea, and it is absolutely impossible to dive unless they're not in the water. Thinking of this, Chen Mu suddenly became enlightened. I said why there is only one figure in Sanyuan Wolf's mouth. Hee, even the top observation hockey was almost blinded by it. It's getting more and more interesting. ... Sanyuan Wolf, this man with the title of Giant Battleship, has a speed that does not match his size. It's hard to imagine that such a fat giant with a height of 180 meters can swim at a speed in the deep sea, so that several sea kings can't catch up. In Sanyuan Wolf's mouth, a figure lay on his back. Vasco shot wearing a clown hat, his drunken face is full of alcohol, his small eyes are white, and a red tongue is drawn out of his wide-open mouth. Standing big sausage nose. Different from the previous image, now he has 2 more stitch marks on the chin. Vasco shot, one of the 4 pirates brought out by Blackbeard from the 6th floor of the deep-sea prison. He likes to drink, not only his face, but also his entire body's complexion is red. In the past, the shape has always been a regular black and white striped prison uniform, with a huge wine gourd on his back. But today, his wine gourd, which never leaves his body, has disappeared. 1,000 meters deep sea. Sanyuan Wolf stopped diving, changed direction, and swam towards the upper left. Chen Mu watched this scene not far away, and he couldn't help but mutter in his heart, I thought you were fish man, diving so deep, suffocating you to death. Then, someone with bulging cheeks slammed his feet on the seabed reef behind him, like a sharp sword in the water, breaking through the layers of water pressure, and swam rapidly in the direction of the huge giant. Sea reef that was borrowed by Chen Mu suddenly clicked, followed by cracks. With the detachment of the first piece of gravel, the entire 100-meter-high boulder was completely shattered and fell towards the depths of the dark and dull ocean trench below. Chapter 23 Be good, be obedient, let's shave the beard first. On the sea, where the sea and the sky are connected, the orange-red sun is already half sinking the sea. As dusk approached, a circle of ripples suddenly swayed on the sparkling sea, and then intensified. A huge figure suddenly broke through the water, breaking the gentle and quiet atmosphere. At the same time, it also disturbed Chen Mu, who was lying on his back on the sea, following the waves. Such a wonderful view was immediately destroyed by this brown, thorn-haired prisoner. Chen Muna's already soft complexion gradually became serious. Chen Mu sullenly took a deep breath, then turned around instantly, changed his backstroke to butterfly, and swam towards Sun Yuan Wolf's huge island-like body. Chen Mu's incomparably swift body, where the butterfly passed, the waves surging, dragging up a wave wall, several meters high behind him. The distance between the two was only a few hundred meters. For Chen Mu, the blink of an eye was useless, even though he was closed now. Sun Yuan Wolf sensed the movement behind him, and was about to turn around to check when he was swiping his hands, but before he turned halfway, he felt that the back of his neck seemed to be severely attacked. The huge body staggered forward and swam a few meters abruptly. After hitting a row mountain, Chen Mu adjusted his posture and lifted his head up from the sea. Shaking his brows, he reached out and touched the top of his bald head with a weird expression. I didn't expect that the 180-meter fat man. He was quite stiff. The prisoner Sun Yuan Wolf, known as the giant battleship, was screaming in pain at this moment, and the giant face with the flesh on his face was tightly wrinkled together. The drunk Vasco shot in Sun Yuan Wolf's mouth covered his ears with his hands, and his tall body was shaken and rolled back and forth. Ah, so noisy. Vasco shot, who was wearing a clown hat, found the right moment, jumped out of the huge mouth that kept opening and closing, and landed on Wolf's right shoulder. Stroked Vivi with his right hand under his left jaw, and several figures fell out one after another from the small crack. The people who fell out were stacked together without any image, lying on Wolf's broad shoulders. Everyone's eyes were dizzy, and they only felt that the world was spinning, and they couldn't come to their senses for a long time. Just then, a light laughter sounded. Hee hee, it really is a bag of fruit. I didn't expect it to be able to hold people. The burly prisoner, nearly 6 meters tall, Vasco shot, froze all over, suddenly raised his head, and looked at Chen Mu, who was sitting cross-legged on Wolf's head. With an incredible look, his drunkenness disappeared. Chen Mu sat cross-legged with his right elbow on his knee and his slightly inclined chin, and looked at the person below with a smile. Sun Yuan Wolf also trembled all over at this time, and stopped screaming. His small bean-like eyes opened instantly, and his jaw kept shaking. Chen Mu smiled, looking at the giant clown below who dared not move, with a teasing expression. You. Vasco shot, who was wearing a tattered prison uniform, pointed at Chen Mu and his right hand trembled. You talked for a long time, but didn't say a word. This made the smile on Chen Mu's face fade away instantly, and a sharp look flashed in his eyes. He hates people pointing at him the most. Because of Chen Mu's anger, the originally quiet atmosphere instantly became tense. Of course, it was only Chen Mu who drew the sword. Jinghua Shuiyu appeared instantly, a rapid sound sounded, and Chen Mu instantly disappeared in place. A strong wind blew his face, blowing his clown hat into the sky. Shot's eyes widened in horror, his body stiffened, and his pestle stood still. On the other hand, Chen Mu appeared behind him, and the left hand holding the knife quickly trembled twice, as if the knife seemed to be contaminated with something unclean. Psi tilde tilde. The sound of the sharp blade slicing through the flesh sounded, and a slender blood line appeared from Shot's left shoulder to his right abdomen, and blood spurted out, splashing several meters high. What? With an extremely painful howl, Shot fell to the ground instantly, and the whole person curled up. The dizzy people were also awakened by this tragic cry of pain, and looked at Shot, who was bloody, and their pupils shrank suddenly. The ship's Dr. Drug Q, who was lying on the ground, raised the wrinkled old face that was terminally ill, and slowly crawled towards Shot. Sitting on top of Sun Yuan Wolf's head again, watched this scene quietly. Poison Q's wrinkled hands slowly put it on Shot's face, and said in a hoarse old voice, "Open. Open." Vasco Shot endured the excruciating pain, and touched the second seam on his chin with his right hand, as if unzipping a zipper, and countless medicines poured out. Enough is enough. Poison Q laboriously opened and closed his lips, and spat out these 2 words with great difficulty. Shot's right hand slumped to the ground weakly, and the crack in his chin was automatically sewn up, as if nothing had happened. Poison Q sat up cross-legged, but the figure was still hunched. Slowly straightening his hands was uncharacteristic. The moment he came into contact with the medicine, he became calm and powerful, his arms turned into afterimages, and he picked out the right medicine at a very fast speed, and then quickly repaired the huge wound. It only took less than 10 seconds from choosing medicine to healing. Poison Q also caused Chen Mu to look sideways slightly, and sighed in his heart. The power of the Blackbeard pirates does have its advantages. Turning his eyes, he looked at everyone in the field again. Poison Q wrapped a bandage on him, the light in his eyes disappeared. He lowered his head slightly, took out a handheld fruit basket from behind, and lifted the white cloth covering it to reveal a basket full of red apples. Pushing the fruit basket slowly in front of Shot, he slowly opened his mouth and said, "Choose." 1. Fighting champion, badgers, whose muscles were bulging all over. Blackbeard Vivi frowned, looked at Shot thoughtfully, and pondered, "Don't test fate this time." Hee, that's right, this time. There's really no need to test fate. Someone who had seen enough of the place said with a chuckle. Everyone with their backs to Chen Mu trembled, only to feel that the temperature around them plummeted, as if they had entered the ice and snow. Sun Yuan Wolf's eyes have always kept a squinting posture, secretly watching the peerless powerhouse. Above his head, he didn't dare to make any movement. Chen Mujinghua Shuiyu took in the space, put his hands up, jumped off Wolf's head, and landed behind everyone. He said lightly, "Hee, this time. You guys are out of boat." Everyone swallowed hard, controlled their stiff bodies, and slowly turned around. With a flattering smile on his face, Blackbeard rubbed his rough hands together and said bravely, "We would like to be your little brother, join your pirate group, and please don't." Before the Blackbeard could finish speaking, Chen Mu waved his hand and interrupted, "Stop, don't talk, you should shave your beard before you talk to me." Everyone present was a fool, and then looked at their captain with resentment. Blackbeard. Chapter 24 The Eve of the Fishman Island War. Blackbeard sat at the front, with his back to the crowd, his shoulders raised, and the voices of Shishi and Susuo sounded one after another, and the black stubble fluttered in the wind and flew into the distance. Blackbeard put the red **** in his hand aside, and a crystal teardrop slipped from his cheek and dripped down. All the crew members were silent, and the atmosphere suddenly became heavy. Chen Mu rolled his eyes and couldn't help complaining in his heart. "Isn't it just a shave? It's like a funeral. Especially Shiryu, it's not shaving your beard, why are you crying? The famous knife is used to shave. That's a famous sword, a famous sword. ... Shiryu was so sad in his heart that he couldn't breathe. Shiryu took this bloodthirsty blade and slashed all the way from level 1 to level 6. Now when unsheathed, just to shave. Shiryu turned his back to the crowd, sat in the corner, took off his white military robe, and wiped his beloved knife over and over again. Chen Mu looked at Shiryu's sad expression and mourned for a second in his heart. Chen Mu shook his head, dispelling the strange thoughts in his mind, and looked at Marshal Teach, who was a little cleaner. Nodding with satisfaction, "My heart is very happy. This is the price of causing trouble for me. Wait. Something is wrong. What's wrong with me today? I suddenly become so fond of ranting." Chen Mu suddenly woke up, his whole body was like being struck by lightning. "I thought that if I reached the ceiling, I would not be affected by the system's armed forces, but I didn't expect. I still followed its path. Mirror flower water moon race high. ... Fishman Island, Mermaid Cove." The beautiful mermaids playing in the water suddenly noticed that there was a darkness above their heads, and a huge sailboat fell from the sky. All the fish dived into the bottom of the water and swam towards the bottom. Boom .. The sailboat quickly fell to the water, and the waves several meters high hit the shore. After the sailboat gradually stabilized, there was no more movement, and the mermaids slowly emerged from the water one by one, looking at the pirate ship that suddenly fell down. Everyone looked at each other in dismay, thinking, could it be an empty ship? No, ships that enter Fishman Island will eventually flow into the sea forest, so why would they suddenly land in Mermaid Bay? The people were even more worried. Just then, there was the sound of paddling underwater. One by one, pirates holding sharp blades and grim expressions suddenly appeared around the mermaids, surrounded them and drove them to the shore. Cough, hey hey hey. A piercing laughter sounded. Caribou, tall and thin with a smirk on his face, appeared in the bow, followed by a strong man with a shovel and a green chameleon. Brothers, Wet Hair, Caribou and Dummy Brother, Caribou officially debut. The mermaids looked at the pirates in horror, with helpless tears in their weak eyes. The Caribou brothers jumped from the boat and landed in front of a crowd of fish. His eyes glanced at Zhongmei without any scruples. Looking at the white and delicate skin and graceful figure, Caribou stretched out his long tongue and licked his dry lips. This group of outstanding mermaids will definitely be able to sell for a high price. A trace of greed flashed in Caribou's eyes. The feet turned into mud and melted into the ground, and the slowly spreading mud moved towards the panic-stricken mermaids. On the sea. Chen Mu folded his arms and sat on top of San Yuan Wolf's head, staring straight ahead. The original, Blackbeard, pirate group stood on both sides of the giant's shoulders. You guys are out of boat now, what are your plans? Chen Mu suddenly spoke, attracting everyone's attention. Everyone looked at each other, pursed their lips, and remained silent. Chen Mu turned his head to look at Teach, and the meaning of the question was beyond words. Teach, younger, took a step forward and said, Go. Go grab a new pirate ship. How did your warship come from? While saying that, he gestured with his hand. It's so big, it's a Buster Call level warship, right? It's also a robbery. The cold gecko sprinkled on the top of Chen Mu's bare head, very bright. Blackbeard was shaken by the dazzling light, and for a moment he forgot to answer. Chen Mu awkwardly coughed twice as a reminder. Blackbeard, Teach shook his head, looked at Chen Mu again, and said, from Marine Admiral Akainu. Chen Mu raised his brows and asked in surprise, Akainu sent it? Yes, the newly promoted Marine Marshal Kuzan. Let us balance the power of the four emperors in the New World. To put it bluntly, let us pirates fight pirates. Hey, incompetent marine. Teach's eyes flashed with contempt. Chen Mu nodded thoughtfully and pondered. Then you go and ask for another one. This time don't cross the windless belt directly. Go to Sabayati Archipelago to code a film, and go guard Fishman Island for me. Quote ? Everyone was confused. Chen Mu glanced at Teach and said slowly, I will talk to Whitebeard about the territory of Fishman Island. As for Ace. Chen Mu's sudden pause made everyone's hearts rise fiercely. I'll try to help you mediate, and if that doesn't work, give him a beating. After he finished speaking, he closed his eyes and began to meditate. Everyone looked at the former Captain Teach, looking at him with a look of defeat. A flash of determination flashed in his eyes. Oh. Although Chen Mu closed his eyes tightly, he spread observation haki and enveloped everyone. The fluctuating emotions of everyone present and the hint of determination aroused his interest. Hee, as expected of the pirate group formed by the villains, they are courageous enough. Chen Mu's mind instantly gathered up, and he already knew what would happen in the future. The top observation haki can briefly foresee the future, but it seems, a little far ahead. If I had this ability in my previous life, I wouldn't have won the lottery even once. Chen Mu shook his head gently and sighed leisurely. Ding! Edward Newgate's injury broke out, and his pirate's influence -1. Close black lens bracket. Quote ? Listening to the system prompt that suddenly sounded in his mind, Chen Mu was full of question marks. Isn't Marco a ship doctor? It's only been a day, and the condition can't be delayed. Vivi twitched at the corner of Chen Mu's mouth, a little speechless. Hey, that's all, I'm going to go there anyway, so I'll do it today. Chen Mu patted the top of his car, Sanyuan Wolf's head, and said in a slow voice, change course, go southeast, speed up. Then he looked at the man in the clown hat who was holding the wine gourd. Vasco shot. Shot, you'll be with me. Shot, shot. Big barrel, shot that ignored him. A trace of anger flashed in Chen Mu's eyes. Devil Sheriff, Lafitte, who was standing beside him, moved his left hand Vivi behind his back, and the stick rotated around and knocked on the back of Shot's head. Shot's drinking stopped immediately, barely opening his hazy drunk eyes, tilted his head, and looked blankly at Lafitte, who was only waist-high. Lafitte still maintained a gentlemanly smile and said lightly, look above. Huh. Shot slowly raised his head, just in time to meet Chen Mu's icy gaze. His whole body trembled, and his pupils shrank instantly. Chen Mu looked at the sober Shot, slowly took back the conqueror haki, and said coldly, follow me later. Okay. Chapter 25 Several forces gather on Fish-Man Island. Fish-Man Island, Forest of the Sea. Jinbei sat with his back against the boulder and his arms folded. Looking at the pirate ship that flew over his head and finally smashed into the sea forest somewhere, he couldn't help frowning tightly. There are more pirates on Fish-Man Island than ever before. Jinbei narrowed his eyes slightly, and there was a hint of worry in his eyes. On the sea. Sanyuan Wolf's huge body stopped on the sea, and ripples swayed between his hands. Chen Mu still sat with his arms folded, and the drunk, big wine barrel, Vasco Shot stood quietly behind him. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Wind sounded on both sides. Teach and others jumped directly to the Moby Dick, the outer ship not far away. After everyone boarded the ship one after another, they looked back at Chen Mu, as if they were waiting for the next step of the new captain. Chen Mu glanced at everyone casually, and said lightly, 1. Drive away all the pirates on Fish-Man Island. 2. Don't fight with the Straw Hat Pirates. 3. Not if you can, if you can't. Saying this, Chen Mu paused, his eyes narrowed slightly, Conqueror haki spread instantly, and the pressure like a collapse of a giant mountain instantly pressed on everyone's heart. Die. Boom tilde. As soon as the words fell, there was a dull roar in the air, as if the space could not withstand the enormous pressure. Teach and others were even more unbearable, they were instantly crushed to the ground, and their minds went blank. Chen Mu's mouth twitched, and he nodded with satisfaction. Conqueror haki that erupted this time is considered to be low-medium, and it can deter this group of villains in a short period of time. When the Whitebeard thing happens, I will rush back, and it should be almost the same. Steady. Chen Mu checked the map and found a huge blue cursor belonging to the Whitebeard pirates. He patted Wolf's head and said, turn around, southwest. Sanyuan Wolf responded with a thin response, and then swam to the southwest, where the Whitebeard pirates were. It wasn't until Wolf's huge figure completely disappeared that Teach and his party gradually recovered. Teach shook the dizziness that still remained in his head, and said with a pale face, Badgers, go to the helm. For this unfamiliar, new captain, everyone felt the heavy pressure, and the atmosphere fell silent again. On the other side, Chen Mu opened the map and silently calculated the distance. At the current speed of travel, it would take 2 hours to reach the sea area where Whitebeard is located. Marine Headquarters. Marshal Kuzan frowned slightly, resting his elbows on the table and his hands folded on his chin, just like a contemplative look of a superior. Admiral Akainu in red with an empty right arm, sitting on the sofa on the left, a trace of impatience flashed in his eyes. The other admiral, Kizaru Borsellino, was half reclining on the sofa on the right, wearing a pair of new yellow sunglasses. Just then, Kizaru yawned, breaking the long silence. Akainu frowned tightly, and was about to scold, but Kuzan took a step ahead. What about the newly recruited Admiral Fujitora? Why didn't he come? Kuzan's eyes narrowed slightly, and his tone was a little serious, looking at Akainu. Akainu was stunned for a moment, then immediately lowered his face, and said, "The person is gone, and the phone bugs can't be reached." Kizaru raised his eyes, glanced at Akainu, and said lightly, "Fujitora went to Fishman Island." Fishman Island. Kuzan Vivi was stunned for a moment and looked at Kizaru, even with Akainu in a daze. Looking at the eyes of the two, the lazy Admiral Kizaru said again, "He invited me to go to Fishman Island a few days ago, but I refused." "Then why can't I get in touch with him?" Akainu narrowed his eyes, and a trace of displeasure flashed in his eyes. "I don't know, maybe it's because I think you're not very good." Kizaru pouted and looked out the window. "You." Akainu stood up instantly, his teeth clenched, and his face was very ugly. "Denga deng tilde." Kuzan buttoned the table lightly and motioned Akainu to sit down. Akainu glanced at Kizaru unwillingly, then hummed heavily and sat down. In this regard, Kizaru pouted again, looking like he didn't care. Kuzan shook his head helplessly, looked at Kizaru and said, "Why did he go to Fishman Island?" Kizaru calmed down, put away his lazy attitude, and said in a deep voice, "He got information that the dark forces of Fishman Island are selling a terrible drug to pirates all over the world." "Is it the recently rumored murderous drug?" "Yes." Aware that the two did not realize the seriousness of the incident, Kizaru added again, "The four emperors also sent their subordinates." The atmosphere in the office suddenly sank, and an invisible pressure filled the entire room. "These restless bastards." Akainu clenched his left fist, got up angrily, and walked towards the door. Baloo 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 tilde. Just then, the phone bug on Kuzan's desk rang. "Hello." Kuzan pondered, and subconsciously answered the phone. "Kaido, one of the four emperors, is going to Fishman Island himself, and I need an admiral to support me." Fujitora's heavy voice came from the other end of the phone. Akainu, who was already at the door, moved his ears and said without hesitation, "I'm going." After speaking, he opened the door and walked outside. "Akainu will go to support you." After that, Kuzan hung up the phone with a solemn expression, and the atmosphere in the room became even heavier. Baloo 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 tilde. The phone bug on the table rang again. Kuzan frowned and connected the phone again. The person on the other end of the phone didn't wait for Kuzan to speak, and then hung up the phone after explaining an order in minimalist words. Duo tilde tilde tilde. Hearing the beep of the phone hanging up, Kuzan couldn't recover for a long time. Kizaru's face was a little heavy, and he opened his mouth, but he didn't know how to speak. "I see." Kuzan closed his eyes weakly, and replied weakly to the phone that had been hung up long ago. Afterwards, the whole person seemed to have lost his energy. He leaned back on the chair and stared at the ceiling above his head in a trance. Long silence. The decadent-looking Marshal Kuzan said slowly, "You go to Fishman Island too?" "We really want to do that," Kizaru said hesitantly. "Yes. After all, it was their order." Good. After saying that, Kizaru got up and walked towards the door. At this moment, Kuzan recovered a little bit of energy and said, "Don't let the two of them know about this." Kizaru paused, nodded stiffly, and pulled the gate of opening away. On the other side, two Revolutionary Army commanders wearing goggles and staring at black top hats, riding a majestic ship, are heading towards Fishman Island. Dragon Palace. A tattered sailboat swept across the sky, crashing straight into the hard shell tower where Shirahoshi worked. Alert. Several Fishman guards looked at the huge pirate ship that was ramming straight in, and their faces were shocked. Rapid footsteps sounded, and several Neptune escorts passed through the corridor and rushed towards the hard shell tower frantically. A soldier rushed to the hall where the banquet was held in Neptune, bowed his head and saluted. "Your Majesty, the big thing is bad, Vanderdecken's pirate ship attacked the hard shell tower. What? Fishmen present were shocked, and the food in their hands fell to the ground one after another. Neptune raised his eyebrows in anger, picked up the huge golden trident, and went straight to the direction of the hard shell tower. Chapter 26 Neptune vs. Hody, Luffy debuts. Dragon Palace, Hard Shell Tower. Boom tilde tilde tilde. With a loud bang, Vanderdecken's dilapidated pirate ship slammed into the outer wall of the hard shell tower. Hody and the others fell from the sky with the broken hull and landed directly in front of the giant gate of the hard shell tower. Hodasan froze Isho and pushed hard against the giant gate with both palms. Not moving. The smile on Hody's face suddenly froze, and a red pill came out of his arms and threw it into his mouth. Dong dong. The sound of the heart beating violently came out, and Hody Jones' pupils contracted. The entire eye socket was blood red, and the pupil became a small white spot. With the sharp teeth, it made people shudder at a glance. The two palms that pressed against the door suddenly burst into blue veins, and the pair of gray arms like horned dragons swelled instantly, growing more than a circle. Creak. The huge portal is being slowly pushed open. The eyes of the soldiers were splitting. No matter how they rushed from left to right, they couldn't break through the defense of the cadres, and could only watch Hody push open the door where little Princess Shirahoshi was. Chirp. At this moment, the sound of breaking the air sounded. A huge black axe whirled towards the hard shell tower, targeting Hody's back. Leopard Zhang threw the wine gourd on the ground, and glanced at the high-speed rotating axe drunkenly. Hiccup. With a wine burp, the leopard hid in a flash and appeared in the air. His right hand was tightly held on the handle of the knife, and he slammed into the spinning axe. Clang. The sharp blade was unsheathed, and a cold light flashed across the sky. The huge sharp axe was cut in half, and the cut surface was very neat. A group of Neptune guards were stunned, looked at the broken axe, and swallowed hard. Leopard Zhang reappeared in the same place. The huge orange tentacles rolled on the ground, lifted the wine gourd, put it to his mouth, and drank it on his own. Tun tun tun, voice of Leopard Zhang was clearly transmitted to everyone's ears. A group of fishman cadres were not surprised, but looking at the Neptune army, with a trembling look, it was obvious that they no longer had the will to fight. Whoosh. The extremely fast sound of breaking the air sounded again, and everyone heard the sound and looked around, only to see a golden lightning streak high in the sky, rushing towards the cadres. In the face of the golden giant halberd that came from the lacing, the cadres took a step forward in an instant and were ready to fight. Even Hody stopped pushing the door, staring at the golden halberd, his muscles bulging again, preparing for the decisive blow. It's Your Majesty. Your Majesty is down. The morale of the guards rose instantly. The hammer-headed shark fishman, the cadre Das, took the lead to meet the giant halberd. Clang. A huge sound of gold and iron sounded, shaking everyone's eardrums, and then a circle of white shock waves visible to the naked eye quickly spread around. Das gritted his teeth, and his hands holding the warhammer were firmly against the golden halberd. The giant halberd trembled and made a humming sound. One person and one halberd in the sky, stalemate. In front of the hard shell tower, Jiao was covered in blue and purple stripes, and his figure slowly melted into the air and disappeared. The frequency of the halberd tremors became faster and faster, and Das was gradually suppressed. When tilde. With a loud bang, the trembling giant halberd broke through Das' defense, and Das was knocked flying with his hammer and fell towards the bottom. Leopard Zhang's eyes narrowed slightly, and his right hand slowly touched the hilt of the knife at his waist. On the other side, the king squid with a gray-white skin wearing a racing helmet, Icarus Musi, 8 red tassel spears, alternately in front of his chest, watching the golden halberd coming, ready to step forward at any time. Withstand. Whoosh. The sound of breaking the air sounded, and Hody flashed out from behind the crowd and rushed into the air. Seeing the sturdy figure jumping to the front of the giant halberd in an instant, everyone shuddered, and several combat cadres instantly charged up and were about to step forward to help. Huh! Hody Jones sneered and pushed hard with both hands holding the halberd blade, and the golden halberd flew back upside down. The Neptune army below was horrified and speechless. On the other hand, looking at the fishman cadres in front of the door, they sighed in relief with some fear, and then the corners of their mouths rose, and there was a flash of pride in their eyes. The leader of our new fishman pirates can compete with Neptune, the god of the sea. Just when all the fishman cadres were full of joy, a huge figure leapt over the guards' heads, and their strong arms reached forward, grabbed the golden halberd that flew back, and moved towards the guard. Hody stabs. Looking at the huge silhouette that suddenly appeared, Hody's pupils shrank suddenly, and he was in midair, and he had nowhere to take advantage of. Facing this sudden and fierce attack, he could only passively raise his arms to defend. It was Neptune, the god of the sea, who attacked Hody with a halberd, the supreme ruler and the strongest of the entire Fishman Island. At this moment, his eyes were full of anger, and his orange fluffy curly hair was flying upside down. Holding the golden trident in both hands, he attacked Hody Jones with unrivaled momentum. When the sound of the symphony of gold and iron sounded, and the squid cadre Icarus, who held the 8-barrel squid spear, blocked in front of Hody, who was slowly falling. A cold light lit up, and the cold sword light, accompanied by a burst of alcohol, slashed towards Neptune's neck. Neptune didn't realize it, and still stared at Hody, not paying attention to the two in front of him. A flash of anger flashed in Leopard Zhang's eyes, and the fierce offensive suddenly increased sharply. One shot, Harbor Bird. Accompanied by a whisper, a blue sword light came first, and instantly hit Leopard Zhang's blade, knocking it back and flying back. Zoro held the wine jar in his right hand, and the word Hidao in his left hand, pointing directly at Leopard Zhang in midair. Hiccup tilde tilde tilde. Zoro suddenly hiccuped, didn't pay attention to everyone's eyes, raised the wine jar directly above his head, and took a big gulp. Damn lower race. Leopard Zhang's face was ashen. Neptune, the sea god who could not stand still, gradually lost his patience, and his hands suddenly pressed down. Originally the squidfish Mandos, who was struggling to support, was instantly shaken by a huge force, and with a bang, a huge pothole was smashed into the floor. Hody Jones, face, and he reached into his arms, took out a handful of red pills, and slapped it hard in his mouth. Big brother Hody. Looking at Hody's actions, several cadres all exclaimed. Neptune, who was chasing down, frowned, and a trace of doubt flashed in his eyes. This red pill seems a little familiar. Hody, who was standing on the ground, was half hunched and panting heavily. The muscles of both arms swelled and enlarged rapidly. Dong dong. Dong dong. The violent heartbeat came to everyone's ears, and Neptune ignored the warning in his heart, and the offensive did not decrease but increased, and the speed increased by 1 point. Hey, hey. Hody raised his head suddenly, staring at Neptune who fell from the sky, his blood-red eyes full of cruelty. Before the people arrive, the momentum will arrive first. The violent wind slammed down towards Hody below, and instantly collided with Hody's explosive momentum. An invisible wave spread to all around, pushing the audience out several meters. Hody had white hair flying all over his head, his expression grim, his huge mouth opened, and he let out a deep smirk. Clang! A golden trident was inserted into the ground. Neptune's pupils shrank suddenly, and a bad omen came from his heart. Bad. But at this time, it was just when the old force had gone and the new force had not been born, and he had no time to react. Hody suddenly appeared, and his fist slammed into Neptune's waist. Neptune's eyes bulged outwards, a mouthful of blood spurted out instantly, and his huge body was also smashed into the air by this huge force. Boom tilde tilde. Neptune slammed into the outer wall of the hard-shell tower, making a violent roar. The outer wall cracked instantly, and huge cracks spread around. Neptune fell heavily, his eyes turned white, and his old body was seriously injured, causing him to faint under such a heavy blow. Small and varied rubble kept falling off the outer wall and smashed towards Neptune, who was dazed, and the dust swept up, gradually covering up his huge figure. The dwarf shark fishman Kadri Dharma, wearing a warrior helmet, jumped out of the cave, holding the steel fork of the Neptune escort in his hand, and stabbed Neptune with a gloomy smile on his face. Geo, who was covered in blue and purple stripes, also emerged from the air, wrapping the chain he was waving around Neptune's neck. Amid the dust and fog, the supreme ruler of Fishman Island is on the verge of life and death. The two who were about to succeed in the sneak attack had triumphant smiles on their faces. Sudden. Two subtle air-breaking sounds sounded, and Bodhidharma and Joe were instantly knocked into the air, falling out of the dust mist. The dust mist slowly dissipated. Luffy, who was flushed red and his skin rose with bursts of white vapor, appeared in front of Neptune. "This is my friend. Whoever hurts him, I will never let him go." Seeing the guy who defeated Brother Arlong appear in front of him, Hody was extremely excited and licked his lips. The figure flashed and disappeared in place. Whoosh! The air on the right side, and Luffy Vivi leaned back, avoiding Hody's punch. Isho coldly, not surprised by Luffy's dodging, and gave a light drink. Rough shark. That was in front of Luffy opened instantly, with 5 fingers bent, grabbing towards Luffy's face. Luffy's solemn face suddenly froze, and his pupils contracted. The whole person made evasive actions in the shortest possible time. Waste. Hody's offensive failed again, and he was a little stunned. The days in the battle, Luffy completely changed in those 2 hellish years. After all, he was carefully, by a certain top boss for 2 years. It was too late, but Luffy lowered his waist to avoid Hody's fatal grab, stomped his left foot hard, and instantly lifted his right foot and kicked Hody's face. Boom! A kick hit Hody in front of the door, and the unusually strong body was also thrown into the distance and smashed into the distance. The Kadris were anxious in their hearts, and Leopard Zang stepped forward instantly, wanting to draw a knife and slash at Luffy. At this moment, a swift sword shadow slashed straight down. Out of the swordsman's intuition, Leopard Zang immediately retreated and looked at the green-robed swordsman who suddenly appeared beside him, trembling in his heart. So fast. Hiccup tilde this is Captain's battle. If you interfere, die. Chapter 27. Are you ready to face my Haki, Hody? Due to Hody's invasion, the Ryugu castle is in chaos. King Neptune was seriously injured and comatose. The guards were blocked from the battlefield by the officers of the new Fishman pirates, and they could only watch their king be beaten. Fortunately, Zoro and Luffy came to the rescue in time, otherwise the supremacy of Fishman Island would have changed hands today. Inside the battlefield, at the end of the corridor, Hody was hit by Luffy, collapsed several pillars one after another, and stopped. His body was buried by the rubble of the collapsed giant pillars, and the sky was filled with dust. Everyone was dumbfounded and looked at Luffy in disbelief. The strongest of the sea, His Majesty Neptune, was defeated by the villain Hody, and the Straw Hat Boy just knocked him out with one blow. This is too difficult for Fishman to accept. Just when everyone was in shock, Luffy and Zoro's oracles moved, both of them frowned at the same time, and glanced at the place where the dust and fog filled the sky. Pat! A piece of gravel rolled out of the dust mist, followed by the second and third. Boom! With a loud roar, countless rubble shot out and shot towards the surroundings. The guards in the front were hit by the gravel one after another and fell to the ground crying. Zoro's right eye was still half open, and his left hand swung the knife at will, smashing the pieces of rubble that shot at him. Luffy shook Vivi's body, tilted his head, and avoided the gravel attack with very small movements. He only suffered from His Majesty Neptune behind him. He was thrown with stones, and his whole body was smashed. Blue and purple. Huodi's violent breath suddenly spread, and the dust and mist were blown away instantly, but his figure disappeared at this moment. Luffy frowned tightly, and instantly turned on observation Haki, carefully sensing the surrounding movement. Found it. Luffy's slightly squinted eyes suddenly widened, and he looked up at the sky, aligning his eyes with Hody who fell from the sky. Rubber jet double gun. After a short period of charging, the fists, accompanied by bursts of white steam, quickly blasted towards Hody above his head. Snapped. The fists and palms intersected, and the invisible shock waves swayed in the air, and the ensuing gust of wind blew everyone's clothes. Hodasan cold issue, his palms folded in an instant, clenching Luffy's fist tightly, his huge mouth wide open, revealing sharp fangs, and biting towards Luffy. Zoro looked at Luffy drunkenly, and threw the empty wine jar to his side, just smashing it on the face of the short fish man who burrowed out of the ground. Against this weak, sneak attack, Zoro didn't even bother to look at it. In the field, Luffy, whose fists were caught, was not panicked. His eyes suddenly froze, a little blackness appeared on his forehead, and then spread to the whole head. Armament hardened. Luffy instantly completed armament hardening of his head. His standing body leaned back at a 45-degree angle, his head as black as iron was pressed down, and the back of his head was close to the ground. Rubber jet, bell. Whoosh. Luffy's headbutt came first and hit Hody's fangs in an instant. Boom, click. Hody flew back upside down and was smashed into the sky. The mouth full of sharp teeth also broke one after another and fell downward. The fists lost their restraints, and the stretched arms quickly retracted. Luffy stared up at the sky, frowning slightly. With a heavy step on his right foot, he shot towards Hody in the air. Rubber jet bazooka. Approaching Hody, Luffy released the fingers that were holding the ground, and the two long arms that were dragged bounced back instantly, slapping against Hody's abdomen, which was powerless to resist. Boom. There was a loud noise again, and Hody bowed, and the figure that was about to fall was forced to rise again. Regarding Hody's ability to resist beatings, Luffy also frowned tightly and fell towards the bottom. Luffy did not pursue the pursuit from high altitudes. One is that there is nowhere to borrow, and the other is, if you continue to fight, the bubbles above your head will be pierced by Hody. When the sea water comes in, he can only be slaughtered by the fish. Zoro glanced drunkenly at Leopard Zhang, who was also full of alcohol, put the knife in its sheath, and walked towards Luffy. New Fishman pirates looked solemn, and there was an inexhaustible shadow between their brows. The strong fishman figure touched the top of the bubble, it began to accelerate downwards. Hody also slowly woke up in the process of falling, reached into his arms, took out 3 red pills again, controlled his trembling arm, and forcibly swallowed the murderous medicine. Bang tilde tilde. With a loud bang, Hody's figure quickly fell, and a piece of dust swayed. A sinister laughter broke out, and Hody grew muscled again and charged at Luffy with an unseen speed. Luffy was punched in the cheek and flew backwards. Zoro's right eye flashed coldly, and the words Hidai came out of the sheath again. Layers of purple aura were rendered, dyeing the blade into purple black. He, who has also experienced training, also completed armament hardening in an instant. Hody punched Luffy with a punch, he threw his punch again without stopping, and slammed towards Zoro beside him. Clang! The fists and blades intersected, but there was a sound of gold and iron. Zoro gritted his teeth and glared angrily, and with the huge force of Hody's fist, he instantly retreated, and his feet drew 2 long ravines on the ground. Zoro lowered his head, bit the word Hidao on the white hilt in his mouth, grabbed his hands to his waist, and unsheathed at the same time. Zoro is furious and intends to chop this damn fish man into sashimi. Stopped by the sudden appearance of Luffy. Zoro raised his head, looked at and patted his shoulder, walked towards Luffy towards Hody, slightly stunned, then chuckled, shook his head, and put the 3 knives in the sheath at the same time. Luffy lowered his head slightly, and the wide brim of the hat covered Luffy's eyes in a shadow, making it impossible to see through. Pat, pat. In this unusually quiet atmosphere, the sound of Luffy's footsteps clearly entered everyone's ears. Walking is just a very common thing, but Luffy showed a very different momentum. When ordinary people step on the ground, they will not generate small cyclones, and when the soles of their feet are completely on the ground, they will not make air ripples. A tight humming sound entered the ears of everyone. A group of fishman cadres only felt that their brains were heavy, and their standing bodies shook for a while, giving people the feeling that they would faint at any time. Even Hody, whose strength has been enlarged dozens of times, is horrified, and his small white eyes tremble wildly. The corners of Zoro's mouth twitched, Vivi's eyes flashed with relief, and he couldn't help sighing. Luffy's hockey, it's really reassuring. Then he put his hand to his mouth with a strange expression, and shouted at Luffy, "Captain, go back to drink and eat meat early after the fight." Luffy's voice was a little low at the moment, exuding an aura of a superior. The battle of momentum. There is no doubt that Luffy has the absolute upper hand, and Hody's defeat has been revealed. On the other side, after nearly an hour, Chenmu finally came to the main ship of Moby Dick. Chapter 28 Unexpected Conflict. The night is getting darker, the bright full moon is covered by thick dark clouds, and the sea with dark tides is also very mysterious under this dark night. Chenmu looked at the huge ship shadow not far away, and was about to let the wolf roar and say hello, but unexpectedly, a high-pitched male voice took the lead. "Fire Fist. No one has seen, the sound comes first." What followed was the orange flames that occupied the entire line of sight, heading straight for Wolf's face. At the moment when the orange flame lit up, Chenmu also saw the scene on the boat. Ace jumped into the air with an angry brow, and threw a flaming fist at the huge wolf with a mighty momentum. Marco, who was covered in blue-gold flames, turned into a colorful phoenix, his wings vibrated, floating above Ace, and staring at Chenmu who was sitting cross-legged on Wolf's head. Boom! A violent roar sounded, and the heavy fist formed by the gathering of flames seemed to hit a transparent wall and suddenly exploded. The eyes of everyone watching the play on the boat suddenly froze, and the atmosphere that was supposed to be relaxed and pleasant also became heavy. Chen Mufeng blew his fist lightly, blowing away the white smoke that curled up on the back of his fingers. Damn! Chen Mu's gesture was naturally seen by Ace. Ace's chest rose and fell violently, flames rose all over his body, and he was about to charge towards Chen Mu not far away. Ace, come back! A thick voice sounded, causing everyone who was facing off by the boat to turn around and look at the tall figure in the dark. Daddy! Marco's arrogance subsided, shook his head at Ace, patted Ace in a daze, and walked over. Tang, tang, tang. The sound of rising flames sounded, and the lights on the ship were suddenly bright. Whitebeard bold and grandiose sat on the high seat, the captains surrounded him, and behind the captains were several huge golden basins, which ignited bright flames, shining like day. Ace slowly walked back to the crowd and stood beside Whitebeard with Marco. Chen Mu jumped, and in the blink of an eye, he was on this giant ship. Vivi glanced at everyone and walked towards Whitebeard with a calm expression. Chen Mu didn't have any special feelings for this man who had the title of the strongest in the world. Only level 500, so the strongest man is like this. Chen Mu put his hands behind his head, smacking his lips a little bored. Chen Mu stopped 10 meters away from Whitebeard. Looking at this burly old man with infusion tubes all over his body, he couldn't help sighing in his heart. Hey, the years make you grow old. Chen Mu calmed down and said with a smile, Whitebeard, it's really hard for me to say something like this to you when we first met, but I can't help it. A trace of doubt flashed in Whitebeard's eyes, and he looked at Chen Mu in confusion, looking forward to his next words. From now on, Fishman Island belongs to me. Chen Mu smiled with a calm look on his face. Everyone was stunned at first, and then their faces changed dramatically, and the atmosphere on the ship approached freezing point in an instant. Whitebeard narrowed his eyes and said lightly, Fishman Island. Hee, Neptune is my friend. So you want to add money? Chen Mu was stunned, then shook his head and chuckled. Yes, it's the Fishman Island in Neptune. Did Teach send you here? Hearing this, everyone remembered that there was an incomparably tall giant on the sea. That man is a member of the Blackbeard Pirates, a villain with a height of 180 meters and the title of Giant Battleship. The captains first glanced at Ace, who was bowing his head and said nothing, then turned to Wolf with a murderous look in his eyes. Well, it doesn't count. This ambiguous answer made Whitebeard Vivi stunned for a moment, and said with some amusing, "You don't seem to be very satisfied with your captain." "Strange, Whitebeard talks a bit too much today." Chen Mu Vivi frowned. "Captain? No, he's just a salaried worker for me." Chen Mu raised his eyebrows and said indifferently. Remembering the system's prompt, he said again, "Fishman Island is now invaded by a large number of pirates. I will let him go first, as for the rest, I will handle it myself." Whitebeard slammed his right hand on his chest, and several infusion tubes dripping with medicinal liquid were pulled out in an instant. With his left hand, he held the big naginata knife. Kong Yunchi, on the side, slowly got up, and rushed towards Chen Mu. Blink of an eye, Whitebeard appeared in front of Chen Mu. Kong Yunchi, held in both hands, slashed towards Chen Mu, and the movements were smooth, in one go. Where the blade crossed, a slender black crack appeared, and the huge force even broke the space. Chen Mu's eyes sank slightly, his left hand was raised, Jinghua Shuiyu crossed over his head, holding off Whitebeard's majestic offensive. Centered on the collision of the two weapons, the space oscillated, and a circle of transparent fluctuations quickly spread around. The captains took a step forward one after another and put their palms forward, blocking the impact. Chen Mu looked blankly at the huge figure in front of him, and said lightly, "I advise you not to punch." Whitebeard didn't care about Chen Mu's threat. He let go of the long-handled sword with both hands, and his left and right fists instantly lit up with white light, smashing them towards the top of Chen Mu's head. "I knew I wouldn't listen." Chen Mu sighed in Vivi's heart, and swung his legs around like a crescent moon, and his right leg slammed into Whitebeard's fist. Fists and legs intersected, and after a brief stalemate, Whitebeard was defeated, and his burly body fell to the side. "Daddy!" the crowd shouted in a hurry. The captain's eyes narrowed. Foil, Vista, the captain of the fifth team, who was like a cheetah, took the lead in attacking Chen Mu, and his vigorous posture was flying fast. In the blink of an eye, it was in front of Chen Mu, and the two swords slashed towards Chen Mu's chest from bottom to top. Chen Mu dodged sideways, waved his left hand downwards, the blade slid across, and after images lit up, he slashed towards Vista's head. Vista's double swords pulled back, rotated his wrists, and the double swords blocked upwards at the same time, blocking Chen Mu's attack. Clang! The sound of swords clashing sounded. Gusta's body sank from the smashing force, and his feet sank into the deck. Chen Mu squinted at Vista, looking at his expression of gritted teeth and struggling. His brows wrinkled, and he suddenly took 10% of his strength, allowing him to breathe, but he couldn't escape. Wow! A squeak came from high up in the air. Marco turned into a blue flame phoenix, with the elemental Ace standing on his back, and the semi-crystalline Jozu in his claws, swooping towards Chen Mu. Chen Mu looked at the strange combination above his head, raised his mouth, first kicked Vista upside down, then raised his right palm above his head and pushed Marco, who was swooping in, lightly. Wind burst from his palm and hit Marco's left wing. With a scream of pain, Marco, who was diving, lost his balance and fell downward. The diamond Jozu released by the double claws completed the crystallization of his entire body in the air, hugged him into a ball, rotated at a high speed, and smashed towards Chen Mu. Ace stretched his arms and turned his hands into blazing flame guns, following Jozu's back. Chapter 29 Feet Fighting ends. Return to Fishman Island. Ace leaned back, and dragged two slender lines of fire with his hands. The Diamond Man Jozu, through the mirrors, all over his body, reflects the flames around, adding a bit of light in this dark night. Chen Mu waved out his right palm but did not retract it, still facing the air, as if facing Jozu Ace's double strike. He didn't even need to dodge. Mid-air, the high-speed rotating diamond Jozu collided with Chen Mu's palm in the blink of an eye. Bang tilde. A dull collision sounded, and Chen Mu's right palm was firmly printed on Jozu's face. Looking at the angry giant face in the drill surface, Chen Mu Vivi Isho. Vivi in the palm of his hand is charged and sent forward. So Jozu flew back at a faster speed and smashed towards Ace, who was rushing. The human-shaped flame in midair was dissipated, but it did not go out. The scattered flames recondensed into 3 balls of fire, like a comet trailing, brushed against the surface of the diamond, and then gathered into a single figure. Shen Huo, Shiranui. Ace drank violently, and his backward hands suddenly slapped forward, one left and one right, hitting Chen Mu's temple. The flames were surging, swallowing Chen Mu's head in an instant. Immediately afterwards, Ace bent his legs, stepped on Chen Mu's chest, kicked hard, turned into an arc of fire, and fell back to the captains. Everyone looked at the man whose head was engulfed in flames in the distance, and there was a faint expectation in their hearts, hoping that Ace's lethal attack would make this mysterious powerhouse drink hate. A cool sea breeze blew past, blowing everyone's clothes up, leaving only the sizzling sound of flames burning. Time passed quietly, and everyone was still staring at Chen Mu. A trace of disappointment flashed in their eyes. Everyone only felt a bitter look on their faces, as if they were pressed against their chests by a boulder. Looking at Chen Mu, who couldn't stand with a pestle, Ace lowered his head slightly, stretched his hands forward, and said softly, "Yingwo, fire, da, mo." Countless small green light clusters resembling fireflies flew out of Ace's palm and flew towards Chen Mu in the field. The green light group gradually wrapped Chen Mu. From a distance, it looked like a human-shaped bee chrysalis, but it was green. Blast. Boom tilde tilde. The firefly covering Chen Mu's body was detonated at the same time, turning the place where he was standing into an extreme day. Everyone flexed their arms to block the dazzling white light, and at the same time resisted the scorching hot air. Ha tilde tilde. The hot wind lasted for 10 seconds before it completely dissipated. After a short period of focusing, their slightly narrowed eyes suddenly widened. How can it be? Everyone was stunned, looking at the figure whose clothes were not even wrinkled. Their faces were shocked, and they couldn't recover for a long time. I said, "Don't, yes, I punch." Chen Mu lowered his head, and a slightly sullen voice came out, which woke everyone up. The people who came back to their senses looked at Chen Mu, to be precise, at the burly figure behind Chen Mu. Dad. The burly old man in silence raised his right arm high, and his right fist burst into an extremely white glow. The circular brilliance shrouded in the fist, as if breathing, would shake the surrounding space out of cracks, as if it were about to shatter a mirror. Obviously, Whitebeard ignored Chen Mu's warning once again. In other words, no one can shake his belief. Over, the white fist on Whitebeard's hand stopped flashing, and a fine humming sound came into everyone's ears, making people's minds swell. Chen Mu, who was the first to bear the brunt, did not feel any discomfort. Feeling Whitebeard's firm mind, Chen Mu sighed helplessly. The hilt of the knife spun around in his palm, turned into a counter grip, and stabbed the old man behind him. Chen Mu's attack was so fast that everyone saw only an afterimage, and then there was the sound of a blade piercing into the flesh. Daddy! The picture at this time was like a freeze frame, and everyone's eyes were split, and they roared in sorrow. Chen Mu lowered his head slightly, making people unable to see his expression. Behind him stood a burly figure with a height of 5 meters. His body was like cast iron. Just by looking at it, it created an unparalleled oppressive force. Sea breeze blew slowly, Chen Mu's lips lightly opened, and a low murmur entered Whitebeard's ears. Go to sleep. Endless sleepiness struck, and Whitebeard slowly closed his eyes. The right arm hangs down naturally, and the left hand holds the long-handled broadsword, standing up straight. Even when you are asleep, it gives people a majestic feeling. Chen Mu's lips opened, and he let out a light breath. The expression on his face was quite a bit of vicissitudes. At this moment, endless angry shouts sounded. Chen Mu suddenly raised his head, and secretly said something bad. Looking at the group of violent reckless men in front of him, Chen Mu rubbed his swollen head, giving him a headache. Just be quiet. Chen Mu frowned, and the top conqueror haki instantly covered the audience. The scene suddenly quieted down. Chen Mu glanced at everyone with satisfaction and said, he just fell asleep. You, and you, come here and carry him over. After finishing speaking, Chen Mu walked to the side of the boat and muttered in a low voice. Really, you are already a lot of age, and you are still so irritable, you are not afraid of slipping your waist. Walking to the edge of the boat, Chen Mu stopped and waved to Wolf and Shot, who were dumbfounded in the distance, motioning for them to come over. The expressions of the two were a little dull, and they nodded subconsciously. Wolf took control of his massive body and swam towards the Moby Dick, ripples in the calm sea. Wolf's huge body stopped beside the boat. Shot, who was wearing the logo clown hat, jumped at Chen Mu's gesture and landed on the boat. Chen Mu looked at Shot in front of him, and complained in his heart. How can I deal with these 5-meter-tall giants today? My neck is sore. Chen Mu, who was born from the heart, really felt a little sore in his neck. He turned around, twisted his neck, and said to Shot behind him, open it and return the things to them. Shot was a little reluctant, but when he thought of Chen Mu's terrifying combat power, he still chose to be obedient, and honestly opened up the seams and mended, and dumped a huge amount of materials into a hill. On the other side, everyone helped Whitebeard back to the giant chair and watched the ship Dr. Marco begin to heal him. Everyone wiped their foreheads and breathed a sigh of relief. Then he turned around and looked at Chen Mu and the tall figure behind him. This is Vasco Shot. Looking at the prison uniform and clown hat on him, it should be. Yeah, it's him. I saw him at Impel Down. Ace's deep voice sounded, interrupting Josu Vista's conversation. The two looked at Ace with a heavy face, a little confused. Marco, who had finished the treatment, also came over, flicked the blue fireworks remaining on his palm, and pondered. He has always been a devil fruit power user. Ace narrowed his eyes slightly, and shook his head with an ugly face. Then everyone came back to their senses and looked at Shot's chin, at the very familiar seam. Where's Bramank, are you back? Josu asked aloud while scanning the people around him. Everyone is silent. Looking at everyone's reaction, Josu already had the answer in his heart. Damn Teach. Damn Shot. Anger rose in his heart. He stepped on his feet hard, and rushed towards Chen Mu and the two of them. Halfway through, the strong arms have already been crystallized. Up, Ace and Marco came first, blocking the furious Josu. Marco, who turned into a phoenix, stopped in midair, pressing his right palm firmly on Josu's forehead, and said in a flat tone, stop. Josu glared at Marco, full of his overly cool attitude. Who stood in front of Josu, withdrew from his elemental form, and said in an equally cold tone. You are no match for him. Looking at Ace's back, Josu shuddered and said incredulously, Ace, why even you? As the captain of a team and a part-time ship doctor, Marco needs to think calmly, which he can understand. But Ace was never supposed to be like this. Josu began to doubt, wondering if he had misjudged him before, and deep disappointment flashed in his sorrowful eyes. So, let me do it. In an instant, flames rose from Ace's body, and the lower part of the waist turned into flames, which erupted suddenly. The whole person rushed towards Shot, who was still dumping items, like a stream of flames. Chen Mu Vivi frowned, raised his right arm again, and the cyclone in his palm condensed, ready to beat Ace back at any time. Not that he wants to save Shot, he just wants this guy to return the supplies and medicines that originally belonged to Whitebeard, and then he can do the task without any worries. Cough, Ace, come back. Whitebeard's weak voice sounded. Ace froze and stopped 5 meters away from Chen Mu. Shot with a grin on his face, turned around and flew back. Chen Mu slowly retracted his right hand. Vivi tilted his head and glanced at Shot with a mean smile. A flash of coldness flashed across his eyes. Shot shuddered, his smile faded in an instant, and he continued to get busy with the work at hand. Whitebeard covered his mouth and coughed lightly, and said in a sullen voice, "You come. Just tell me about Fishman Island." Whitebeard, whose condition was getting worse, Chen Mu Vivi frowned. With a light sigh, he said, Can you protect Fishman Island for a few more years? And now Fishman Island is in civil strife. Even Marine and even Kaido, one of the 4 emperors, rushed to Fishman Island in person. The seriousness of the matter is beyond your control. But I can. Whitebeard fell silent. Everyone's heart froze, and even Kaido of the Beasts, who has an immortal body, also rushed to Fishman Island. There, what the hell happened? Whitebeard laughed self-deprecatingly and stared at Chen Mu. Then you can say what happened. Don't ask, I can't give you the answer, and I don't know what happened to get them all together on Fishman Island. And, I don't need to know either. Catch them, beat them up and they'll be all right. Hee hee, if it's yours, maybe it's okay. Well, I've finished the 2 things I have to do, so let's go first. After that, Chen Mu turned around, jumped lightly, and jumped on top of Wolf's head. Shot glanced at everyone with fear, and hurriedly followed. Watching Chen Mu leave, everyone breathed a sigh of relief. Ace turned his head and said to Whitebeard, "Dad, let me go to Fishman Island." Whitebeard closed his eyes slightly, as if asleep. Jozu couldn't help but say, "Dad." Marco on the side crossed his chest with his arms, looked at the 2, and said lightly, "As long as that man is still there, you can't kill Teach and Shot." Ace and Jozu's eyes, and they wanted to refute, but they couldn't speak. Looking at the speechless crowd, Whitebeard sighed softly, "Go back and rest." Chapter 30 Akainu Kizaru vs. Akainu. Dark and dark deep sea. Ix, who experienced the pain of the crew being killed and the ancestral pirate ship being taken away, took out the phone bug and dialed Princess Shirahoshi's special line with the last hope. However, Princess Shirahoshi's refusal made him completely disheartened. This time, instead of being furious as usual, he hung up the phone very calmly. With heavy steps, I boarded the Noah Ark. Hody, with white hair, lay bruised in the pile of rubble. A group of cadres were also wounded and stood beside him panting. Luffy Zoro stood side by side. The 2 of them looked at the group of Fishman pirates expressionlessly, and the heavy pressure lingered in the hearts of all Fishman. "Luffy, Zoro." Zoro yawned boredly and looked at Luffy suspiciously. "Huh? Are you finished?" Luffy said calmly. Zoro turned his head to look at the shivering Fishman cadres, pouted his lips boringly, and responded, "Well, it's over." "Well, then go back and continue to eat meat." After speaking, he turned around first and left along the corridor. Zoro followed closely behind him, frowning. "I always felt that something was missing." Dragon Palace City, at the gate. A faint ripple suddenly appeared in the air, and the striped Fishman Jace, which was integrated with the environment, suddenly appeared at the gate and pulled down with both hands. Hey. With a gloomy laughter, the gate of Ryaguchung slowly opened, and tens of thousands of Fishman and human pirates flocked outside. Here, Chen Mu followed the map marker and found Teach and others. "Chen Mu. Are you Blackbeard so spineless? In the future, you are going to become one of the 4 emperors." Chen Mu looked at Teach with a flattering face and complained wildly in his heart. Chen Mu was still sitting on top of Wolf's head, looking at Teach on the boat and said, "Why haven't the coding been done yet?" Teach sneered. Hey, go right away. Chen Mu pouted and said, "No need to go, just wait here." Wait. Teach and the others were confused. Wait. After saying that, Chenmu closed his eyes. Vasco Shot, wearing a clown hat, glanced at Chenmu cautiously, and jumped towards the beluga boat. In the eyes of everyone's doubts, Shot walked up to Teach's side and whispered in his ear. "Boss, Whitebeard, lost." Teach's eyes were round, and he looked at Shot in shock. "You saw it with your own eyes?" Shot glanced at the crowd around him, hesitated, and nodded heavily. "Yes." Hiss, hiss, hiss. There was a sound of gasping for breath. Coupled with the incredible expressions on everyone's faces, it's simply. Chenmu pouted, and calmly took observation hockey back. On a huge warship, the lazy Kizaru and the serious Akainu stand side by side on the bow, looking into the distance. The atmosphere is a little awkward. Kizaru rubbed his nose, looked at Akainu in a trance and said, "It's a little cold, I'm going back." Akainu's expression stiffened, he turned his head, looked at Kizaru's back in a dashing departure, opened his mouth, hesitated a little, and swallowed his words. After all, this guy couldn't ask any useful information. Shaking his head, he went back to his room to rest. At this moment, at the end of the sea level, a small island appeared. "Why are there islands here?" Akainu looked suspiciously in his heart. "This is Sanyuan Wolf." Akainu's expression suddenly became solemn, and he ordered to speed up, heading towards the island-like figure. Quick going for a distance, the huge warship drove in front of Wolf. Looking at this stupid giant, he said coldly, "Why are you here? Where is your captain?" Wolf blinked his bean-like eyes, but didn't answer. Seeing this, Akainu was angry. A thick plume of smoke rose from his shoulders, and fiery red lava flowed, covering his arms. At this moment, Chenmu, who was lying in Wolf's hair, slowly sat up. "What, do you want to do it?" Seeing Chenmu sitting cross-legged on top of Wolf's head, his heart skipped a beat. "Who are you?" Old-fashioned lines. Chenmu couldn't help rolling his eyes. Seeing that Chenmu didn't want to answer, Akainu stopped speaking, and his body instantly transformed into elemental form. With the pungent smoke rising, Akainu instantly entered a state of battle. The fiery red and viscous lava dripped, black smoke rose from the deck, and small holes melted. "It's scary Akainu, are you planning to burn the ship?" Golden lights appeared around Akainu, and finally they converged into a flashing figure. "Admiral Kizaru." Chenmu raised his eyebrows and looked at Kizaru, who suddenly appeared. No, he was looking at Kizaru's new glasses, and the corner of his mouth evoked a shallow smile. "This old guy's new glasses are not bad, even better than the last pair." Chenmu began to think about the spoils of war in his heart. Kizaru, who was stared at by Chenmu, stood upside down with chills all over his body, and his back shivered with chills. He glanced around secretly, and finally found Chenmu with a smile on the giant's thatched hair. My observation hockey ignoring this person. Kizaru frowned rarely, and doubts arose in his heart. With a flash of blue light, the slender Zanpakuto appeared in Chenmu's hand. Chenmuden smiled and said, "Lend your boat to use it." After that, the figure flashed and disappeared from the eyes of everyone. The two admirals, looking at each other, turned their backs to each other. At the same time, the observation hockey range covers the entire venue. Akainu's left arm turned into lava, and the lava condensed on his clenched fist, turning into a vicious dog that devoured people. Kizaru on the other side, with his palms facing outwards, pulled his hands to the sides, and at the same time, a rapier shining with golden light appeared in his palms. Dog biting crimson lotus, and Sky Kong cloud sword, done in an instant. Dang. A chaotic footstep sounded, and 5 vice admiral and a group of soldiers appeared in the bow. Everyone first glanced at Admiral, who was waiting for him, and then turned to the huge figure like a hill. Sanyuan Wolf. Vice admirals who saw the giant's appearance were startled. VV's eyes flashed a bit of vigilance, and they swept around. Hey 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 hey. With a wicked laugh, the beardless Teach jumped onto Wolf's shoulder and appeared in front of everyone. Sure enough, Teach. A sullen flash of anger flashed in Akainu's eyes. When he saw Wolf's huge figure, he had already guessed that Teach would be nearby, but due to Chen Emu's pressure, he had to focus on him. Oh, is it the new Shichibukai, so scary tilde? Kizaru turned his head, looked at Teach with narrowed eyes, and breathed a sigh of relief. If it's just this family, there should be no threat. Just as Kizaru was about to breathe a sigh of relief, a warning came in his heart. Observation Haki sensed an extremely dangerous signal, a very vague warning. Woo tilde. The wind blew, and the soldiers were blown off the warship one after another and fell into the icy sea. Vice admirals who reacted in advance squatted down in time and ducked. Chen Mu stood on the side of the boat and retracted the kicked left leg, a hint of surprise flashed in his eyes. Then it became clear. It's not uncommon for Vice Admiral to have observation Haki, and besides, I just wanted to blow them off. Chen Emu's thoughts had just started, and before he had time to fall, observation Haki's perception made his debut with a dazzling golden light, and he slashed down at his head. Little stars behind you gather, Kizaru is here. Whoosh. The golden sword slashed down quickly, but Chen Mu Vivi turned sideways and dodged. Seeing Zonkong with a single blow, Kizaru opened his mouth with a teasing expression on his face, and with a, so scary, sound, Kizaru's body turned into golden light again and dissipated in the air. Chapter 31 Admiral abandons the ship, the Blackbeard pirates separate. Dog biting Crimson Lotus. Akainu appeared behind Chen Mu and gave a low voice. The huge dog head formed by the condensed lava slammed out. Feeling the hot breath so close, Chen Mu bowed and leaned forward. Dangerously and dangerously, he avoided it, and secretly said that it was dangerous, and almost burned the hair on the back of his head. Afterwards, Chen Mu blinked his big eyes, and then remembered. His flowing hair was sacrificed to the earth 2 years ago. It was a breezy morning, he held the soil in tears and buried his youth with his own hands. Chen Mu suddenly woke up. The figure flashed and retreated to the edge of the warship. He raised his left hand and looked at Jinghuashuiyu in his hand. VV's mouth twitched. The influence of this thing is getting worse and worse. Chen Mu took a deep breath, looked up at the two admirals standing side by side, and said with a serious face, "Come on, fight quickly." After all, the figure disappeared in place. "Be careful." The slumped vice admirals spoke eagerly. Akainu frowned, turned his head, and saw the rapidly enlarged instep. Boom! Chen Mu kicked in the air, hitting Akainu in front of him, and with his entire upper body, it exploded with a bang. Kizaru's eyes narrowed slightly, looking at Akainu who was kicked, his expression turned a bit serious. Then the golden light flashed, turned into a little starlight, and drifted away with the wind. Chen Emu's face was calm, and it seemed that Akainu's reaction was not surprising. He lightly stepped on the boat with his feet and hurriedly chased Akainu away. 8. Near mirrors. Chen Mu suddenly raised his head and looked at the golden Kizaru in the air. A gleam of light flashed in his eyes, his rushing figure suddenly stopped, his hands slammed down, and with the force of recoil, he slammed into Kizaru in midair. Kizaru let out a mocking cry, and a dazzling beam of light instantly enveloped Chen Mu. The light beam penetrated Chen Mu and then refracted, bounced towards the main mast, and then reflected towards Chen Mu in midair through the thick mast. Chen Mu was wrapped in golden beams and forcibly locked in the air. The light in Kizaru's palm flickered constantly, and the beams of light refracted back and forth, with Chen Mu as the center, penetrated his body back and forth. This is just the penetration in Kizaru's eyes. In fact, Chen Mu doesn't have any special feelings, and even thinks it is funny. It's so warm and comfortable. Chen Mu closed his eyes and enjoyed it. He couldn't help but sigh inwardly. Everyone in the field stood there stupidly, watching Kizaru show his power. Akainu snorted unwillingly, raised the left arm of the lava, and aimed at Chenmu in midair, which was a dark hound. The giant arm of lava quickly stretched, dragging the billowing black smoke, and headed straight for Chenmu. Boom! With an explosion, the golden light beam disappeared, and thick black smoke quickly spread out, occasionally erupting red fireworks. Standing on Wolf's shoulders, Teach and the others, although their faces were shocked, there was a glimmer of anticipation in their eyes. Don't let this terrible guy die here. Everyone prays silently in their hearts. Compared to facing Chen Emu's coercion every day, it is better to let him die in battle. No wonder Teach and others resented him so much. Without this person's suppression, they can be lawless on the sea. Before long, the sea breeze blew, blowing the billowing smoke away, and the world seemed to regain its tranquility. A fish belly white floated up in the eastern sky, and the mild sunlight shone on everyone's faces, and everyone narrowed their eyes in satisfaction. Chenmu sat on top of Wolf's head, squinting as well, looking at the direction of the sunrise. He couldn't help sighing. It's the first time I've watched the sunrise at sea, it feels so comfortable. Everyone who felt the same way nodded and agreed with Chen Emu's statement, and a happy smile gradually appeared on their faces. Afterwards, the smiles on everyone's faces froze. They all raised their heads and looked at Chen Mu, who suddenly appeared. The smiles faded in an instant, and then turned into a stunned look, unable to hide the shock in their hearts. Chen Mu lowered his head, glanced at everyone with a smile, and waved to say hello. Aren't you disappointed? Chen Mu smiled brightly, but in the eyes of Teach and others, it was like a cold winter and a 12th moon, only endlessly cold. Chen Emu's slightly narrowed eyes gradually opened, and his smile also subsided. Looking at everyone, he said coldly, "Now it's your turn, go and grab the warship for me." Chen Emu's eyes were slightly cold, and his icy tone was like a group of icebergs, freezing everyone in it. Everyone shuddered in unison. Facing this unquestionable order, they turned their heads in frustration and jumped onto the warship one by one. Chen Mu watched Teach and the others jump onto the warship. With a smile in his eyes, he lay down in a comfortable position, ready to watch the play. Chen Mu was lying on his side with his head in one hand and the poisonous red apple in the other, and began to nibble. This apple is all right, it tastes quite sweet. Chen Mu looked at the fruit basket with a surprised expression, and secretly praised a wave of poisonous Q in his heart. Afterwards, he patted Wolf's scalp and said to him, "Your hair should also be repaired, it's a little thorny." Hem. Wolf glanced at him and nodded with a terrified expression on his face. "Tisk, don't shake." Chen Mu quickly grabbed the fruit basket, and Vivi scolded. Wolf's muscles tightened in fright, and even his breathing slowed down a bit. "Look back to the warship." Kizaru flashed gold and fell back to the boat. Standing side by side with Akainu again, he looked at Chen Mu with a heavy face. Vice admirals, who finally recovered from the suppression of Haki without Chen Mu, all stepped forward and stood behind the two admirals. The soldiers who were blown into the sea also passed through the rope ladder one after another and climbed up. Akainu put his left hand behind his back, glared at Teach and others in front of him, and said coldly, "Teach, get out of the way." Teach glanced at Wolf behind him, looked at Chen Mu with a smile on his face, and shook his head helplessly. "Akainu, how about giving me this warship?" Feeling the killing intent in Akainu's eyes, Teach swallowed and hurriedly added, 10%. "I'll add 10% to the completion of that mission." Hearing this, Akainu's eyes flashed with hesitation. Kizaru looked at Akainu in surprise, and the meaning of the question was obvious. Akainu bowed his head and said nothing, seemingly confused. "Akainu, you better not do stupid things. Don't forget who gave the order this time." Hearing this, Akainu raised his head suddenly, a trace of fear flashed in his eyes, then he gritted his teeth fiercely. Lava flowed from his left arm, punched with a dark hound, and went straight to Teach and the others. "The battle starts now. Dark water. Teach let out a low voice, pushed his hands flat, and the black cyclone in his palms turned rapidly, firmly resisting Akainu's lava punch. Kizaru leapt into the air again, with his hands crossed on his shoulders, his fingers intertwined with golden rays of light shining. Bachi, Joan, hook. Before the word, jade, could be exported, it was kicked away by a figure. Chenmu looked at the silhouettes of people gathered in the distance, took a bite of the apple bitterly, and said, "Do you want to destroy this ship?" After speaking, he glanced at Kizaru with a hint of warning, turned around and flashed, and returned to the VIP seat, above Wolf's head again. Everyone's pupils shrank, seeing Chenmu's shot this time, it seemed stronger. Chenmu pouted and complained, "I'm just too lazy to use force, I'm afraid that one punch will give you the finale." Seeing Chenmu turn back, all the Marines breathed a sigh of relief, tightened the weapons in their hands, found their opponents, and rushed forward. The golden dots gathered in the middle of the field, and the figure of Kizaru gradually appeared in front of everyone. Rubbing his aching abdomen with his left hand, he placed his right hand softly on Akainu's left shoulder. "Forget it, go back and change to another warship." Hearing this, Akainu frowned, looked at him angrily, and slandered in his heart. "It's you who want to fight, it's also you who don't, do you think the war is a joke?" Kizaru's anger at Akainu was unheard of. Calmly turned around, ignoring the doubts in the eyes of everyone, walked to the rear of the warship, put down the lifeboat, and jumped down. "Your Excellency Kizaru." Just as the soldiers shouted in a hurry, they only saw the back of Kizaru jumping down. This. Everyone looked at each other, and then locked their eyes on Admiral Akainu. "This bastard." Akainu gritted his teeth secretly, and glanced at Teach and the others. "Don't forget your promise." After saying that, he turned around and took everyone away from the boat. Teach and others were also stunned for a moment. "This has already been marked, so you can just leave." Chenmu cut his voice out of boredom, thinking, "I knew that the kick just now was light." In this delicate atmosphere, Teach took over the warship logically. Teach walked to the bow with a flattering face, looked up at Chenmu, and said, "Hey, it's ready to go." Chenmu threw the fruit core back in his hand and jumped down lightly. When passing by Teach, he said, "This boat is too small for the wolf." Teach was stunned for a moment, first glanced at Chenmu's back, then turned his head to look at Wolf with an innocent face, and forced a breath, intending to fight for his subordinates, but before he could speak, he was told by Chenmu's words. Choked back. "Look at what, and you, all go." Everyone's faces were full of doubts, and after thinking about it, they just couldn't remember where they offended this master. "Oh yes, the navigator and the helmsman stay, yes, the two of you, Lafitte and Badgers." After speaking, Chenmu completely disappeared in front of everyone. Shut, who was unbalanced in his heart, looked at Teach with a look of hesitating to speak. "Captain, I." At this time, Teach, with Vivi's mouth open, didn't respond. Shiryu, who was holding a famous sword, and Van Oka, who was carrying a long-barreled sniper rifle on his shoulders, were the first to react. They walked towards Wolf calmly, and then jumped slightly and landed on his shoulders. Avalo Pizarro, the evil king, with blue beard and blue hair, followed closely behind. Who was wearing a pink robe, passed by Teach expressionlessly, kicked her legs hard, and jumped to Shiryu's side. Q, who was the slowest to respond, was still on the verge of dying. He coughed as he walked, and when he passed by Teach, he said, "Cough. It's time to go, Captain." After listening to Poison Q's words, Teach Vivi lowered his head, couldn't see his expression clearly, turned and left. At the end, he said, "Shut, let's go." Badgers scratched his head suspiciously, looking at the pale Lafitte. Lafitte pondered for a long time, a flash of determination flashed in her eyes, and stepped in Wolf's direction. "Lafitte, you stay with Badgers, and I'll find you when the time comes." The voice of Teach made Lafitte's body froze, and her right leg stopped in the air. Lafitte's face full of unwillingness, Teach said again, "This is the captain's order, at Fishman Island, wait for me, did you hear me?" Quote. Yes. Lafitte nodded heavily and walked past Badgers with her head lowered, grabbing his champion belt, and pulling him back. Go, leave for Fishman Island. Inside the cabin, Chenmu put his hands behind his head and lay on his back on the sofa, the corners of his mouth twitching from time to time. Didn't I temporarily requisition your migrant workers? As for being so sensational, it's like life and death. Chenmu Vivi sighed, turned over, and didn't think about it anymore. In this way, the white whale-shaped Moby Dick outer ship carried Teach and others to the Sabayati archipelago for coating. The guidance of the navigator Lafitte drove to the designated position and dived into the deep sea. Chapter 32. Tens of thousands of pirates besieged Ryugu Castle. Dragon Palace City, Banquet Hall. Chopper stood on tiptoe in the red gold chair, holding a pink-coated donut in each hand, eating one from the left and the other from the right, naive. Usopp held a large piece of meat in his hand, chewing in his mouth. Hearing footsteps, he turned his head and saw Luffy and Zoro returning from the side door. "Hey, Luffy, where's the old king from Dragon Palace?" Usopp waved at the two of them. "Ah, my meat." Usopp raised the sea beast meat over his head and waved it at Luffy, with a row of clear tooth marks on it. Luffy's face collapsed, and his flesh hurt. Whoosh. Luffy's right arm suddenly stretched out, grabbed the sea beast meat in Usopp's hand, and then retracted like a spring, pulling it back instantly. Usopp was shocked. Luffy. Seeing Luffy eating like a storm, Usopp quickly grabbed another piece of meat on the table after a brief shock, turned his back to Luffy and took a big bite. Zoro raised his right eye slightly, looked at the childish two, shook his head, chuckled lightly, walked to the other side of the table, and sat down beside Chopper. The sturdy right arm moved slightly on the table, pushed a few dishes of dessert a little far away in front of Chopper, and then picked up the jug with his right hand, and drank it, ton. Chopper turned his head, facing Zoro's cute Isho, and continued busy with his dessert, licking, work. Geelong Cod Plaza. It is the square on Fishman Island, where Princess Otohime once gave a speech to the residents of Fishman Island, and was assassinated by Hody. In the plot of the previous life, Hody tried to execute Neptune here, but failed, and turned to a decisive battle with the Straw Hats. It was also the first time that Luffy used Conqueror Haki on the battlefield 2 years later, stunned 50,000 pirates in one fell swoop, and the scene was extremely bloody. However, in this life, because of Chen Emu's interference, the plot was changed. Jones, the protagonist of the events on Fishman Island, is now behind bars. Of course, a group of defeated cadres also followed him and went to prison. It's normal. On the north side of Fishman Square, there is a magnificent sea, and on the shore, a huge warship is docked. This is also the correct way to enter Fishman Island. Clap. One after another, burly figures jump down from the warship, followed by the sound of clogs stepping on the ground. The visitor has short black hair, closed eyes, and a beard around his mouth. The most conspicuous thing is that there is an X-shaped scar on his forehead that extends to his eyes. Is the new admiral, Fujitora. Wearing a marine coat and wearing a lavender kimono, Fujitora pulled out a wooden sword from the black belt and touched the ground as he walked. He first made sure that there were no stumbling stones in front of him, and then he paced forward. Fishman onlookers were all silent and their expressions were somewhat resentful. After all, Fisher Tiger, the former Fishman hero, died indirectly at the hands of Marine. The Neptune guards stood on either side of the crowd, making way for Fujitora and the Marine forces behind him. Dressed in a purple gown and with a long catfish-like beard, Minister Left accompanied Fujitora to introduce the beautiful scenery of Fishman Island from time to time. In this regard, Fujitora just gave a faint, sound. The Minister of the Left, who is in charge of diplomacy, smiled nonchalantly, leaning on a wooden horn crutch and walking side by side with Fujitora. The group of people swept out of the square in a mighty manner, heading straight for the larger, Dragon Palace, in the distance. Under the deep sea without any light, a huge warship wrapped in bubbles was sinking steadily, heading towards Fishman Island. It was the three of them, Chen Mu, Devil Sheriff, Lafitte, standing at the stern of the boat with an expressionless face, looked at the strange school of fish swimming outside the boat, and didn't know what he was thinking. Fighting Champion, Giza's Badgers, with his muscular arms, tightly held the steering wheel. Chen Mu was lying on the sofa in the cabin like an uncle. So weak. Without Jinghua Shuiyu's buff bonus, Chen Mu's seasickness was committed again. I saw him, his eyes were vacant, and his arms were drooping down at will, apparently looking like he was hollowed out by the color of wine. Thinking about it, he finally gave up the plan to take a knife, because he firmly believed that seasickness, after a few more times, the body will slowly get used to it. The two people outside had no idea of Chen Mu's current state. Even if they know, it doesn't matter, they can't break the defense anyway. The warship at this time was only an hour away from Fishman Island. Noah, Ark, which is half the size of Fishman Island, is slowly breaking away from the seabed and flying towards Fishman Island. With a grin on his face, Vanderdecken X stood on the deck that was widely praised. From a distance, it looks like a tiny ant. On the other hand, the warships of Chen Mu and others were also getting closer and closer to Fishman Island. Dragon Palace, which was slowly rising, the left minister stood side by side with Fujitora on the bow with a bullhorn stick in both hands, looking at the ever smaller town, and asked aloud. What's the matter with you, Marine Admiral, in my own country? Fujitora shook his head calmly and said, It's not business, I just want to visit the king of your country in advance. The left minister pondered on his face, then slowly turned his head and looked at Fujitora. Is it because of the World Conference? Fujitora nodded first, then shook his head. The left minister frowned slightly, and Vivi lowered his head, lost in thought. This is the end of the conversation between the two. Dragon Palace City, Banquet Hall. Luffy lay on the ground with a comfortable face, patted his stomach, which was several times larger than his body, and let out a comfortable hiccup. Zoro was also drunk, lying not far from Luffy, and fell asleep. Usopp, who was full and drunk, and Chopper with a drunken smile, jumped around the banquet hall, and the laughter continued. At this moment, the sound of neat footsteps sounded. His Majesty Neptune, who was covered in bandages, and his three princes walked in through the side door, followed by dozens of guards. Obviously, they had finished their business at this time and rushed back to the banquet. Luffy Zoro, who fell to the ground, and at the empty dining table, everyone's expressions suddenly became weird. His Majesty Neptune coughed twice and said, Go get some more food, prepare some more sea animal meat and wine. Oh, by the way, you can also get some desserts. Yes. The guards nodded, then turned to leave. Meat. Wine. Dessert. Quote. The two people and one beast who heard the key words opened their eyes instantly, and a dazzling light shot out from their pupils. In this regard, the four of Neptune are all ha-isho. Hiccup old man, have you finished dealing with those guys? Luffy asked with a serious face. Neptune nodded knowingly and said with a smile, It's really hard work for you all. The sea beast meat will be served soon, just wait a bit. Ha ha ha. Seeing this, the three princes laughed happily. Luffy suddenly remembered Nami Robin and others, and said eagerly, Master, I have a few friends. Before he could finish speaking, he was interrupted by a chuckle from the first prince, Shaoxing, who waved the stack of wanted orders on his hand and said with a smile, I have already notified the Dragon Palace troops to greet your companions. Come on, it should be coming soon. Quote. Just then, the phone bug rang. When everyone heard the sound, their eyes lit up. Xiaoxing chuckled lightly and said, "Haha, isn't this coming?" The eldest prince picked up the phone bug with a smile on his face, and with a burst of hurried voices, the smile on his face gradually subsided, and then his brows darkened and his expression was quite heavy. Seeing the sudden change in his son's face, King Neptune, who had a bad premonition, frowned and said in a deep voice, "What happened?" "Well, I see." The eldest prince's face was gloomy, and he hung up the phone bug forcefully. Everyone present, except the eldest prince, also Zoro, knew what happened. Zoro raised his right eye slightly, glanced at Luffy who was waiting for food, and stood up from the ground. "Drink too much, get active." After saying that, he walked to the side on his own. The eldest Prince Vivi was startled, his expression a little dazed. "That direction is the Hard Shell Tower. What is this swordsman doing?" He shook his head, glanced at everyone, and said solemnly, "The soldier who went out was arrested, and—" Neptune said urgently, "And what?" "And we're here, just die, Neptune." Ha 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 ha. Fishman Kadri Gao, who was covered in stripes, appeared in front of the crowd. Huh. Everyone was a little surprised. Luffy looked up, his expression a little surprised. There was still a fish that slipped through the net. At this moment, the sound of messy footsteps sounded, and countless pirates swarmed in. These thousands of fishmen are just a part of the Hody pirates. After all, Ryugu Castle is only so big. Zoro, oh, found it. Everyone was stunned, this person came back so quickly. At this moment, Usopp took a step, slipped to Luffy's side, and said meanly, "Zoro's family is lucky, I didn't get lost for a long time this time." Hearing this, Luffy was stunned for a moment, then laughed. Zoro's eyes twitched and he turned his head furiously. "Hey! Usopp, I heard that." Usopp ignored Zoro's angry gaze, clasped his hands behind his head, looked up at the sky, whistled, and slipped aside. Damn! Seeing Zoro's slightly playful smile, Gao shivered instinctively, then thought of the pirate army behind him, and heaving a sigh of relief, he had to sneer a few words out loud to strengthen himself. Zoro ignored it directly. Immediately, his face was full of anger. "Despicable human, turn to look at me and say you, greenhead." Joe's roar echoed in the banquet hall. The atmosphere at the scene was also quiet. Both Usopp and Chopper covered their eyes with their hands, indicating that they were not looking. The smile on Luffy's face was even greater. His left hand slapped the floor vigorously, his right hand covered his laughing pained abdomen, tears bursting from the corners of his eyes. "So funny, greenhead, ha ha ha." Zoro turned around slowly and lowered his head slightly, making it impossible to see his expression clearly. But judging from the frequency of his trembling, he was clearly on the verge of rage. "You called me what?" Zoro kept his head down, his tone very cold. Gao shivered all over, the stripes on his body flashed, and then, the whole body quickly melted into the air. Gao, who was hidden in the air, slowly hid his body to the rear of the pirate army, and a pair of eyeballs glanced around, looking for the figure of the green-robed swordsman. "Did you just call what?" Zoro's voice without a trace of temperature sounded, like a whisper of death, making people stand upside down. Jay's expression froze, and the fear in his heart was infinitely magnified. No, impossible. Not only Joe, but even the thousands of pirates only felt a chill on their backs. Fishman pirates who almost filled the entire banquet hall was one, but they didn't dare to look back, as if there was a big terror behind them. Luffy, Nipton and others, who were few in number, all had the expression of a crowd eating melons, waiting for the start of the good show. Clang! In the banquet hall where needles could be heard, there was a sound of a sharp blade returning to its sheath. Zoro's face was stern, and the cold light in his right eye gradually receded. With his left hand hanging by his side, his right hand resting on the hilt of the sword, rubbing Joe's shoulder and walking past. "I don't kill anyone who doesn't have the will to fight." As soon as the words fell, the trembling fishman subconsciously parted a path, allowing Zoro to pass. Not long after, Zoro returned, stood by Luffy's side, glanced at Usopp lightly, and looked at him with a guilty conscience, looking up to the sky and whistling, couldn't help but laugh a little. Luffy patted Zoro on the shoulder and laughed. Neptune and the others were secretly startled, and there was a hint of awe in the eyes of Luffy and the others. "Your Majesty, the wine and food are ready, and do you want to serve it?" Fishman in a white apron and a chef's hat walked behind Neptune and whispered into his ear. After Neptune was stunned for a while, he said with a smile, "Bring it up." At this moment, Luffy took 2 steps forward and said with a smile, "Hey, we have a banquet, do you want to be together?" The group of fishmen shook their heads, and took 2 steps back with a wary face. Chapter 33 The Strength of Admiral Fujitora. Gao, who was at the back of the army, took a deep breath and forced himself to calm down. The stripes on his body flashed, and his figure merged into the air again. Zoro raised his brows, glanced lightly in the direction where Gao disappeared, then stopped paying attention and continued to drink his little wine. The atmosphere at this time was rather awkward. A group of vicious fishman pirates, crowded together, blocked the door of the banquet hall. Neptune and others on the other side are enjoying rich food. Everyone looked at each other, not knowing what to do. At this moment, the pirates who were huddled in a group made a commotion. "Big Brother Jay is gone." Hey, don't talk nonsense, how could Big Brother Joe throw away? Big Brother Joe. It's over, now even Big Brother Joe is gone, what should we do?" The hall suddenly became extremely noisy. Seeing this, Nipton walked up to the fishman and coughed lightly. "Let my soldiers go, and I can let you go." Everyone was stunned for a moment, and then their faces showed embarrassment. Let it go, how to let it go? Those guards were very stubborn, we were killed long ago. Seeing the silence of the crowd, Nipton frowned and said coldly, "Tell me, where are my soldiers?" The pirates bowed their heads and remained silent. The great Prince Sharkstar, wrapped in transparent bubbles around his waist, quickly approached a fishman pirate at the front while the blue fishtail flicked, picked up his collar, and said angrily, "Come on. Where have all the soldiers gone?" Fishman's facial muscles twitched, his eyes dodged, and he didn't dare to answer. From the man's dodging eyes, Sharkstar already guessed the answer. With anger in his eyes, he pushed his chest heavily with both hands, and knocked the gray-skinned shark fishman back a few steps, hitting several people before stopping. Down. At this moment, a burst of "Bolu Bolu" sounded. Everyone turned their heads and looked at Neptune. I saw that he took out a blonde curly-haired, shaped phone bug from his arms, pressed his huge finger on it, and connected the call. "Hey, who is it?" "Your Majesty, what's going on with these pirates at the gate of the Dragon Palace?" The deafening roar of Minister Zuo came from the phone bug. Neptune removed the phone bug, covered his ears, and looked a little embarrassed. When Minister Zuo's voice fell, Neptune slowly brought the phone bug in front of him, and said a little embarrassedly, "This. It is. The raid of the new fishman pirates, I don't know." Before Nipton could finish speaking, he was interrupted by Minister Zuo. "Okay, Your Majesty, you don't have to blame yourself. This time, I have lost Your Excellency Fujitora. Please treat him well later." Definitely. Neptune hung up the phone in a hurry and let out a long breath. In the past, there was still Princess Eiji who could take care of him, but now, only this long-winded minister of the left is left. Nipton shook his head helplessly, and then remembered the deceased Princess Eiji. His expression suddenly became depressed. Second Prince, Huangxing walked to his side and said with concern, "Father." With a delicate mind, he noticed Neptune's face. He knew that this was only revealed when he went to Ocean Forest to mourn his mother. Nipton shook his head, indicating that he was fine, then paused and said to Luffy and the others, "Everyone, please evade for a while. Our foreign minister was accompanying a marine admiral, and the incident happened suddenly, please." Forgive me. After that, he bowed to Luffy and the others. Vivi. Nipton looked ashamed, and his heart was also very tormented. They had just sacrificed their lives to save him and help them suppress the rebels. Fortunately, he turned his head and invited Marine Admiral. The key is that Marine Admiral also helped him clear a large number of rebels. Hey, it's so hard to be a king who knows everything. Neptune sighed inwardly. Marine Admiral. Usopp's face was shocked, and even the thigh meat he held in his hand fell off. Fortunately, he was caught by someone's outstretched arm. Luffy retracted his arms, tightly grasped a piece of thigh meat of a sea beast in his palm, turned his head, and said solemnly, "Which admiral?" Luffy was still brooding about Admiral's terrifying power. He didn't want to be forced to separate again just after reunion. Neptune said, "Your Excellency Fujitora." Fujitora. The crowd was full of question marks. Luffy turned his head to look at Zoro, Zoro looked at Usopp, and Usopp looked around, and finally found Chopper hiding behind the chair. Chopper still exposes most of his body in front of everyone. Usopp, you didn't see me, hurry over. Everyone was speechless, with black lines hanging on their foreheads. The great Prince Shaoxing saw everyone's confusion and explained, after the Battle of the Headquarters 2 years ago, Marshal Sengoku abdicated and was replaced by the former Admiral Kuzan. The world made up for the vacant position of Admiral in the Marine Headquarters. Specially recruited from all over the world, through which His Excellency Fujitora was appointed. Toll nodded in understanding, then continued to look at Zoro. Feeling Luffy's questioning eyes, Zoro twitched the corners of his mouth, rolled his eyes, and said, "See what I'm doing, hurry up, do you want to fight Admiral again?" Luffy, oh. Luffy stood up, jumped off the dining table, waved to Usopp and Chopper behind the pillar, and said, "Don't hide, go away." Zoro glanced at the three with a black line on his face. No, it was 2 people and 1 beast, and said in an unquestionable tone. "Follow me." "No, I refuse." Usopp waved his hand in disgust. Quote exclamation mark exclamation mark exclamation mark. I don't want Zoro to lead the way. Chopper lay on Usopp's head, wrinkled his face tightly, and agreed solemnly. Zoro tilted his head, curled his lips, and muttered softly, "Really, are the 3rd and the 4th talking to the 1st all these years?" Usopp said loudly with a face full of resentment, "Hey, we heard it. Also, why are you talking about the order of arrival?" Cut. Zoro turned around, leaving only the green back of Usopp's head. Hee, since that's the case, why don't you let me lead the way? At this moment, a loud voice came in from outside the banquet hall, interrupting everyone's quarrel, and the banquet hall became silent in an instant. Luffy and the others turned their heads and looked behind the thousands of fish-man pirates. Da, da, da. It was the crisp sound of clogs stomping on the floor. Fishman who had stood for a long time separated again and looked towards the door. At the end of the line of sight, there is a middle-aged man in a marine coat, holding a wooden cane in his hand, constantly tapping the ground, making a slight, da-da, sound. Looking at the high-ranking minister of the left, carefully accompanying this person, everyone has already guessed the identity of the person who came, and it should be the newly promoted Admiral Fujitora. Admiral Fujitora, come. Hee, this must be the head of the Straw Hat Pirates, Captain Luffy. Fujitora stepped out of the crowd, stopped 10 meters away from Luffy, and chuckled. Blind. Usopp looked at Marine Admiral who was overwhelming the audience, his facial muscles stiffened, and he expressed the doubts in everyone's heart. Even Neptune was taken aback, it was the first time he saw the new admiral. Where did the rude people come from? Seeing that everyone was being rude to Fujitora, Minister Zuo shouted. Afterwards, he turned to Neptune and said, "Why are you so close to these pirates, Your Majesty? Are these human pirates holding you hostage? Guard, guard." The blue veins on the foreheads of everyone jumped. You gave us a chance to speak. Neptune sneered, they are my guests too. Guest. Minister Zuo shook his beard with anger and looked at the Han Han with a shocked expression on his face. Then, dragging the long black catfish tail, he hurriedly moved in front of Neptune, raised the horn stick, and slapped his knee, forcefully. The position of the suspected knee. Asked with a look of hatred for iron and steel, "You said, these pirates are the guests you invited back, aren't they?" The three princes looked up at the sky and whistled mockingly, as if they had nothing to do with me. Yes, yes. Neptune found that his three sons ignored his call for help, so he had to bite the bullet and added, "They also helped us catch the rebels, and Hody and others are already imprisoned in prison. In the tower." The three princes and the right minister whose right arm was in plaster nodded one after another. Minister Zuo just gave up and bowed back. The old minister was in a hurry just now and offended His Majesty. "Please punish me. The tone is quite sincere." No problem, ha. Ha ha ha. Nipton scratched his head and laughed. The conversation between the monarch and the minister ended, causing the hall to fall into silence again. Fujitora's eyes were closed, and the X-shaped scar on his forehead added to His Majesty. At least half of the Fishman rebels, who were already leaderless, slumped to the ground when they heard the news of Hody's arrest. The promise of liberating Fishman Street, and the promise of making me a nobleman, are all liars. There is only one thought in the heads of the rebels. That is, now, how, what, do. You said surrender, you killed another person's guards again, and unfortunately, you also slaughtered them all, but there was no one alive, leaving only 3 or 2 of the guards in Longgangcheng. Just be tough, just the swordsman in green on the opposite side can chop us up like melons and vegetables. Not to mention Captain Luffy and Admiral Fujitora, better not even think about it. It's really hard for the fish to live. The thought of living in the prison tower in the future, all the rebels burst into tears. On the other hand, from the moment Fujitora stepped into the banquet hall, Luffy's eyes never left him. This seemingly gentle and amiable middle-aged admiral actually put a lot of pressure on Luffy and others. Even Usopp and Chopper were ready to go to war at any time. Under this terrifying pressure, Zoro frowned and stared at Fujitora's cane. From the swordsman's intuition, he could feel that it was actually a knife, a sharp blade hidden in a cane. Clang. Zoro bit the word Hidao on the white hilt in his mouth. His right hand held the 3-generation ghost with a flame pattern, and his left hand was Chushui with a dark back and a purple-red time pattern on the blade. The 3 famous knives that belong to the 21 work of the big quick knife are all unsheathed. Huh. Fujitora's ears moved, sensing an inexplicable fighting intent, and instantly focused his attention on Zoro. Zoro's pressure suddenly increased, and while clenching his teeth to support, the black armament began to wrap and cover. After a short time, the surface of the 3 famous knives was covered with a layer of black iron. Fujitora didn't care and said to Neptune, "Your Majesty Neptune, do you need to clean up these pirates for you?" Fujitora's words seemed to be asking for opinions, but in fact, people are already approaching Zoro. Clang. The sound of gold and iron resounded throughout the audience. Zoro held both knives horizontally, holding the knife that was slashing down. Damn, what a heavy knife. Only after the fight did I know how heavy Fujitora's sword was. Second gear. Luffy's second gear instantly opened, his figure flashed, and he appeared above Fujitora, his arms bent, and armament began to spread upward from his fists, wrapping his forearm at an extremely fast speed. Rubber jet bazooka. There was a roar in the air, and the 2 fists that were reaching their limit instantly broke the sound barrier. However, what is unexpected is that the seemingly bulky and slow Fujitora also has an unimaginable speed. Just as Luffy's fists were about to hit the top of Fujitora's head, the scabbard like a long brown stick was instantly raised, just blocking Luffy's attack. After a brief moment of surprise, Luffy flashed and appeared behind Fujitora. Armed hardened, rubber giant elephant gun. Even Admiral was wounded by this punch. But Fujitora, after all, Is Admiral who was directly promoted from the world conscription, it must have something special. The attack behind him became more violent, and Fujitora no longer hesitated. The left hand holding the scabbard slammed down suddenly, hitting the wooden scabbard heavily on the back of the knife lingering in purple air. Boom tilde. The violent purple spread instantly, and the surrounding ground suddenly sank. The pressure in the air increased tenfold, and Zoro, who was in the center of the pressure, felt like his bones were about to be crushed. He coughed up a mouthful of blood, and he almost blurted out. Zoro pressed hard, and after contracting his arms vivi, they unfolded instantly, and the whole person quickly rotated. Black rope, big tornado. With Zoro as the neutral, a giant tornado with a black glow rose from the ground. Zoro also escaped from the range of the heavy pressure, and because of the overturning of the heavy pressure, blood overflowed from the corners of his eyes. And Luffy was crushed to the ground by gravity. The huge elephant gun smashed a huge round hole, and Luffy kept sinking. Ah! Luffy couldn't even lift his head, so he could only bow his head and roar, forcing himself to stand up. Usopp, Luffy. Usopp no longer hesitated, took out several green seeds from the oblique bag, put them into the huge black slingshot, and shot them towards Fujitora. Slaying green star skull explosion grass. Fujitora frowned slightly, gave up Luffy who was stubbornly resisting, turned and slashed directly, cutting the shot in half. However, Usopp's attack was not so simple. The moment the seeds shatter, a large smoke like a skull is released, which can cause explosive damage to nearby enemies. Boom! Fujitora put his arms in front of him and took a few steps back, and the gravitational field dissipated. Usopp had a look of joy in his eyes and shouted, "Chopper! Strengthen your feet!" The running Chopper snorted lowly, transformed into a reindeer about 2 meters tall, slapped Luffy on top with his horns, humped Luffy and ran. The speed was staggering. At the moment of the battle, the two main forces were hit hard in an instant. Usopp and Chopper also wanted to retreat, and their eyes swept to the side door. At this moment, Zoro's body was covered with strange black smoke, and a strange red light flashed in his right eye. There was no human emotion in his eyes, which was extremely cold. Usopp, who was standing in front of him, suddenly shuddered, his hair standing on end. Out of the doctor's intuition, Chopper was the first to notice Zoro's abnormality and whispered at him. Zoro, what's wrong with you? Call. Zoro didn't respond, his breath getting heavier. This black fog. Fujitora suddenly thought of the giant gate incident a few days ago, and her pupils shrank suddenly. It's him. Between the thoughts of the electricity, I realized something in an instant, and no longer hesitated. The purple-black gravity accumulation slashed towards Zoro. Suddenly, a heavy wall of tens of meters long appeared, and with the majestic pressure that overwhelmed everything, it went straight to Zoro. The purple-black wall of heavy pressure quickly approached everyone, and even the floor of the Dragon Palace city was blown away. Boom tilde 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 tilde. There were bursts of explosions in the air, as if even the air could not withstand the enormous pressure. Just at this critical moment, a figure in yellow suddenly appeared in the field. Chapter 34 Shenmue debuts. Fujitora wants to quit. Go back to 3 minutes ago. A huge warship was moving slowly in the direction of Fishman Island. In the cabin, lying on the sofa, Shenmue, who was enjoying the thrill of seasickness, was suddenly alerted by the system. Ding! Straw Hat Pirates, Luffy is facing a crisis of defeat. Close black lens bracket. Ding! The Straw Hat Pirates, Zoro is facing a crisis of retreat. Close black lens bracket. Shenmue sat up abruptly, blinked with confusion on his face, and waited for the system to read. 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 30 seconds, 60 seconds. After a minute passed, the system was like a child who suddenly fell asleep, and there was no sound at all. In desperation, Shenmue opened the system map and saw that the cursor marking Luffy and Zoro turned red. This situation. This is a capital danger. Chen Mu's eyes narrowed. He took out Jinghuashuiyu from the system space, and disappeared into the cabin in an instant. Stern. Lafitte, who was inexplicably sad, and Badgers, who was smiling all over his face, suddenly had their hearts jumping. The two stared at each other for a moment, looking at Chen Mu, who suddenly appeared on the deck. Before the two could react, Chen Mu bent his legs to charge up, and with a loud noise, the deck instantly shattered, and sawdust and planks flew. Chen Mu turned into a golden beam, smashed through the bubble film above the warship, then turned in the air, and shot diagonally below the deep sea. That's also the direction of Fishman Island, just not the correct entrance. Badgers looked confused and looked at Lafitte, his eyes full of inquiries. After thinking for a while, Lafitte shook her head indifferently and said softly, "Continue to going and meet on the island." Badgers nodded, continued to hold the rudder, and continued to move forward according to the original route. Dragon Palace City, Banquet Hall. Looking at Chen Mu, who suddenly appeared, Chopper's heart skipped a beat, and his black pearl-like eyes suddenly widened. "Uncle, be careful." Hearing Chopper's urgent cry, Chen Mu Vivi was stunned for a moment, staring at Chopper with big doubtful eyes. He didn't care about Fujitora's avalanche-like attack, and turned a blind eye. Roar. A large amount of white steam suddenly appeared in the hall, followed by a low beast roar from Chopper. White steam and heavy pressure and strong winds hit Chen Mu in the middle at the same time. The ultra-high temperature white steam did not harm Chen Mu, but it gave him a warm feeling, just like walking into a public bath back then. Suddenly, a huge shadow suddenly appeared in the white steam, rushing towards Chen Mu. Chen Mu blankly watched the shadow approaching rapidly, then grabbed himself and moved sideways. Boom! The wall and slammed into Chopper's huge arm full of brown hair. Chopper roared in pain. Enduring the severe pain, he said to Chen Mu, who was in the palm of his hand, "Uncle, you go with everyone, I'll hold him back." After all, he threw Chen Mu in the direction of Usopp, but he suddenly turned around, spread his black fingers, and reshot at Fujitora below. Carved hoof, coconut. Facing the huge palm slammed down by Chopper, Fujitora's expression was as usual, but his heart was not fluctuating. When the giant palm was only 1 meter away from the top of his head, he suddenly drew the knife and swung it rapidly. A purple halo suddenly appeared above his head. 1, 2, 5. In the end, the number of purple rings was fixed at 5. Gravity, repel. With a light drink, Fujitora sheathed the knife. The purple ring on the top of the head is also the moment when the blade is sheathed, and the momentum skyrockets. The purple ring with heavy pressure, while expanding, rose to the top of the head. Not long after Fujitora swung the knife, Chopper's huge palm came into contact with the ring, and his posture was stiff. But as Fujitora's knife was sheathed, Chopper's huge palm shook violently. No matter how hard it pressed, the giant palm couldn't go down another inch. As the purple ring continued to expand and rise, Chopper's huge black palm was finally unable to suppress it, and instead bounced high by its shock. And even his huge body was hit by the ring and flew to the ground, smashing towards the rear. Chen Mu's eyes were quick and his hands were quick. First, he slashed heavily with his knife, stunned Zoro, who was about to be transformed into a Shura. Then he swept his legs, and the strong wind blew the dazed Usopp into the distance. The immobile Luffy and the unconscious Zoro followed closely behind and flew to the side. Chen Mu, who had done all this with ease, only felt that the light above his head dimmed. He raised his head and looked at the huge beast shadow smashing towards him, and shook his head helplessly. Boom! Chopper fell to the ground with a thud, splashing rubble all around. Chopper's sighed with a strange expression, looking at its huge palm and body without any scars. He couldn't help but smack his tongue for a while. Oh, this resilience, I am afraid that it is too late to go to the hospital, and the wound will have healed automatically. However, the pain doesn't seem to go away. Chen Mu's thoughts returned, and he glanced at Usopp who stood up slowly in the distance, and the people in Dragon Palace City who were still in shock. Vivi shook his head. Hey, this melon-eating scene is really in line with their weak character. I started complaining again. Chen Mu Vivi pouted, took back the Zanpakuto without a trace, and walked towards Fujitora. Fujitora's ears moved, and he clenched the cane with both hands, ready to unsheath at any moment. Looking at Fujitora Admiral who was on guard, Chen Mu's eyes flashed with a dull look. Admiral like you, I just beat up two in one breath. Chen Mu rolled his eyes. Walked up to Fujitora and said to him, I'll give you two choices. Clang. Before Chen Mu could finish speaking, he was interrupted by the sound of a sword being drawn. Fujitora held the staff sword backwards, and the sharp blade came out of the scabbard in an instant, and the sharp blade flashed a frightening cold light, slashing across Chen Mu's neck. The face of Fujitora's powerful slash. Chen Mu tilted his head slightly, a trace of impatience flashed in his eyes, and he murmured in his heart. Let me cut it off after I finish my sentence. Are you so-called marine admirals so impolite? Ignoring Chen Mu who was unscathed, Fujitora retreated. As the blade slowly sheathed, the gravity around Chen Mu's body suddenly surged, the ground began to crack quickly, and the sound of clicking could be heard incessantly. Chen Mu frowned slightly as he looked at the huge crack that spread rapidly under his feet. At this moment, with a sound of clang, Fujitora's sharp blade was sheathed. With Chen Mu as the center, the floor within a radius of 10 meters collapsed and turned into several huge stone slabs, which were about to sink into the dark ground below. Everyone watching the battle could feel the huge gravity in that area, but Chen Mu looked calm, slowly raised his left foot, bent his right leg to charge, and jumped gently. Before the huge dark hole appeared, he jumped out. Gravity coverage area. Fujitora's body was shocked, and he looked at Chen Mu with an incredible look on his face. Clap clap clap. There was a sound of slapping clothes. After Chen Mu jumped out of the gravity area, he slapped the dust on his clothes with disgust. When he raised his head, he looked at Fujitora with a look of contempt. Rude bastard. You, how are you? Fujitora said with a stiff expression in disbelief. Don't talk, Chen Mu snorted, interrupting Fujitora, who was speaking intermittently. With a face full of anger, he continued while approaching Fujitora. Anyway, you are a high-ranking marine, a positive figure shrouded in justice, and you don't even have the most basic courtesy. Are all of your marine executives some reckless men? Ah. You talk. Fujitora's inner shock couldn't be further increased, and even when Chen Mu walked up to him, he didn't react at all. Hey, talking to you. I'm dumb. Chen Mu could not help frowning when he saw that he was still dumbfounded and did not reply. The seemingly powerless right palm was pushed towards his shoulder. Out of the keen sense of the swordsman, Fujitora unsheathed the sword subconsciously. As soon as the clanging sound came up, the sword light flashed, and before it could be fully unsheathed, the right hand that was pushed out by Chen Muheng turned and patted it back. Still drawing a knife, Chen Mu was extremely angry. Glared at Fujitora with an expression of hatred for iron and steel, and said, Are you out of your mind? This is Dragon Palace City, the seabed under 10,000 meters. Taking a deep breath, Chen Mu continued his anger. If this place is destroyed, you are ready to be buried at the bottom of the sea. Don't think about using coral bubbles, even if you have it, I can easily pierce it. After all, the scene suddenly quieted down. Chopper glanced at the fierce flame. Chen Mu shrank his neck in fear, cancelled the monster transformation, and began to heal Luffy and Zoro. Usopp's chin was shocked to the ground, and he looked at Chen Mu in disbelief. Looking at the bald man who had been praised by Nami as a mobile cash machine, he secretly swallowed. The rebels huddled together and shivered. Nipton and the others were shocked, and their hearts were shocked beyond measure. Fortunately, I stabilized and didn't arrest this person, otherwise, the consequences would be unimaginable. Said hello to Chen Mu in advance, wiped the sweat on their foreheads, and they were afraid for a while. Sight returned to Chenmu and Fujitora again. Coughing twice, Chenmu's eyes were clear, and he pondered to Fujitora, "What did you say just now?" "I give you two options." At this moment, Usopp's slightly trembling voice came from a distance. Chenmu first glanced at him, then slammed his palm and said, "Yes, that's right, I just said, I'll give you two choices. 1. Leave immediately. 2. Speaking of this, Chenmu paused, leaned forward, and whispered in his ear. "Like Kizaru and Akainu, get beaten up by me, and then leave in disarray." After that, Chenmu stood up straight again, folded his arms in front of his chest, and stared at Fujitora with all his time, waiting for his decision. The two of Kizaru and Akainu were actually stopped by this person. Could it be that he? Thinking of this, Fujitora's heart skipped a beat. The atmosphere was quiet again. At this moment, the dragon-shaped telephone bug on the stone table rang. Everyone's eyes turned and looked over. Minister Zuo forcibly calmed down his mood, walked over and answered the phone under everyone's attention. "Hey, who is it?" Minister Zuo said with a trembling voice. "Hello, we're Marine, requesting to enter the island." Everyone was shocked, and looked at the phone bug that kept opening and closing its mouth in shock. Note: this is only Ryagu-chan's exclusive phone, which can only be used on hands-free. See, Marine. Minister Zuo was taken aback for a moment, looking at Chenmu with a stiff expression. Chenmu nodded to him and motioned for him to continue. "I came to our country at this time, may I ask if there is something important?" "Hehe, we have a special mission that needs to enter the island, and we also ask your country to release it." After a pause, he added, "The person in charge of this mission is Your Excellency Akainu Kizaru." Hearing this, Fujitora frowned suddenly, clenched the handle of the staff knife subconsciously, and took a step back. The corners of Chenmu's mouth twitched wildly, feeling that his face was about to be smashed at this moment. This idiot! Chenmu had already heard who the voice was inside the phone bug, so he resisted his anger and walked over, picked up the phone bug, and shouted loudly. "Lafitte, what are you pretending to be? Didn't I tell you to stay outside the island? Why are you entering the island?" Lafitte. A very familiar name. Everyone fell into contemplation. Fujitora said solemnly, "Is it Lafitte from the Blackbeard Pirates?" Fujitora not far away, and gave a faint, Quote. There was silence on the other end of the phone, then a beep beep sound. "Hey, you actually hung up on me." Chenmu laughed angrily. Fujitora said again, "What is he using as our Marine's phone bug?" Chenmu didn't answer, "Just be a quiet and beautiful man." Quote! Fujitora was startled, and her heart was shaking. Could it be that it was really given by this person? Seeing Fujitora's changing expressions, Chenmu raised his eyebrows and thought. Not bad, not as dumb as it looks. On the other side, Teach and others, who had finished coding from Sabayati Archipelago, took the Moby Dick and started their journey to Fishman Island. In the meantime, there is a small interlude. Teach and others landed on the island, grabbed a passing islander, and asked him where to find a coding craftsman. The innocent islander was frightened by the evil-looking people, and tremblingly pointed in a certain direction, saying, The best craftsman is, in a bar on, the 13th land island." Getting the answer, Teach loosened the man's collar, laughed and pushed the man aside, swaggering over. After a while, everyone came to the door of the bar, looked up at the strange name of the bar, and after confirming that it was right here, opened the blue curtain and walked in. 3 days passed in a flash. Moby Dick outer ship, inside the cabin. Teach curled up on a large bed, clenching his fists tightly against his eyes, trying not to let the tears flow. Two bullying thieves. I'm a notorious Blackbeard." A low sobbing sound came from the closed door, echoing in the dim corridor, and there was an atmosphere of tears for those who heard it. On the deck, Shiryu and others stood at the bow of the boat, looking at the white-haired old man on the shore who waved goodbye to them. The sunny smile on his face and the colorful gemstone rings on his face, everyone sighed silently. Chapter 35 Hidden Mission Completed, Fused with Special Bait. Dragon Palace City, a dilapidated banquet hall. Wearing a marine coat, Fujitora, with a group of marines, bowed solemnly to King Neptune and expressed his apology. Then, he turned and left without a trace. And all the fishman rebels sat on the ground with a decadent look, surrounded by guards armed with spears and halberds. These escorts were very lucky and went out to meet Fujitora with Minister Zuo, and fortunately escaped this disaster. In the ruins of Fishman Street, a huge ancient ship is flying over Chi, heading towards the upper space of Fishman Island. Deacon Ix, wearing a yellow short shirt, stood on the huge deck with a grin on his face, and a trace of deep hatred flashed in his eyes. At this time, the banquet hall overflowing with wine. Therefore, the previous battle delayed a group of fishman chefs from serving food. After the battle subsided, the escort escorted the thousands of rebels to Fishman Square to prepare for their ideological education. No way, the number of rebels is large, and most of them are bewitched by Hody and others. In their original intention, they are just poor fishmen who want to live a happy life. Notice banquet hall, except for the king's chair and Neptune, has furniture that can sit again. People can only sit on the ground. Fortunately, there was a brand new white tablecloth on the ground, which was piled with countless foods for everyone to enjoy. Hiccup. It was a wine burp, belonging to Zoro with his eyes bandaged. Hiccup .. This sound is full of hiccups, belonging to Luffy, who is weak and lying on the ground. Hey, Luffy, don't stick your tongue out at the food. Usopp, who was sitting cross-legged beside Luffy, held a piece of meat in his left hand, and hurriedly pushed the food in front of Luffy out. Ah, my, meat ... Luffy drooped his eyelids and protested feebly. Really? Usopp raised his forehead with a sigh, picked up a piece of thigh meat from a distance, and handed it to Luffy's mouth. Luffy's eyes lit up, and with the only strength left in his body, he tried to open his mouth to the maximum, and then bit down hard. He struggled to tug at his neck, trying to tear off that big mouthful of satisfaction. The end, Chenmu couldn't stand it any longer. He grabbed the back of Luffy's neck and pulled it hard, so that a certain captain could eat that big mouthful of satisfaction as he wished. Afterwards, Luffy looked at Chenmu with tears in his eyes and was a mess of emotion. But our protagonist Chenmu, he is a man with a bottom line, how can he easily let a boy hug him? He pushed him away immediately, and successfully avoided the tragic fate of wiping his nose and tears from his clothes. On the other hand, because there were too many rebels to be escorted, some jail guards from the prison tower were temporarily dispatched to fill up the number. This also led to the weakness of the guards, and Jia-O, who was stunned by his stealth ability, took advantage of the chaos to touch it. Huge steel cell. Only remaining cadre of the new Fishman pirates, the purple-black striped Fishman Geo, found Hody and others in the bottom cell. Looking at the people whose breath was declining, Jia-O froze all over, and said in a trembling voice, "Huo. Big brother Hody." Hody, whose hair was like withered white grass, raised his head with difficulty, and smiled at Jia-O, who had a worried face. Following Hody's issue, his wrinkled face was instantly pulled up, and with his pale complexion, it looked particularly penetrating. Jia-O's heart trembled. Looking at the withered people in the cell, he subconsciously took a step back. How are you? Jia-O, who was in extreme shock, found that he couldn't even speak. His dry and pale lips and said very laboriously, "Jio. Medicine, have you brought me?" After saying that, he stretched his scrawny arm towards Jia-O who was outside the iron fence. Jia-O looked at the thin palm that was stretched out tremblingly, his eyes full of shock, and he couldn't believe that the person in front of him was the high-spirited big brother Hody, the spiritual leader who brought their new Fishman pirates out of darkness. Jia-O subconsciously took 2 steps back, shaking his head vigorously, unwilling to believe it was true. Wine. I want wine. The same old leopard Zhang also stretched out his hand to Jiao, who was outside the cell, and the tentacles that were strong and powerful were now shriveled and out of shape. At this moment, a ghostly voice sounded behind Jiao. Oh, you have that kind of thing on you, right? A tall and thin figure appeared behind Jiao and whispered in his ear. Jiao's body trembled, followed by bulging eyes and a look of difficulty breathing. Shush, don't talk. After you die, things are still mine. The chilling voice sounded again. Jiao clenched his fists with both hands and pressed them to his throat, as if trying to pull something. After a while, Jiao's breathing stopped, and the whole person's breath of life disappeared. Looking at their dead companions, Hody and others could only stretch out their hands helplessly. It was at this moment that everyone saw the person behind Jiao. It was a blond man in a marine uniform and sunglasses. The young marine had a gloomy smile, and with his raised left hand illuminated by the light, he could see a silk thread reflecting white light. The other end of the silk thread happened to be wrapped around Jiao's neck. The young marine crouched down, fumbled around Jiao, pulled out 3 red pills, and grinned isho. Then he slowly got up, put the pill in his trouser pocket, and walked towards Hody and the others in the cell. Everyone in Hody froze, and fine beads of sweat began to appear on their foreheads. The man stood outside the iron fence, cold isho to everyone in the cell. Then the right hand stretched out and grabbed it hard in the air, and the hard iron fence was instantly cut open, along with the bodies of Hody and others. In this way, Hody and others were forced to end their lives in this dim cell. 5 almost transparent silk threads were in the air, and the scarlet blood slowly flowed to the man along the silk threads. Be precise, it should be the test tube of the medicine flowing into the hands of the man. Shaking the red test tube full of blood, Ming brother with a dark smile shrugged his nose. The smile on his face gradually became psychedelic, and sighed, "Is this the power of life? It's wonderful." Afterwards, Brother Ming put a tube of fresh blood into a suitcase with a red bottom and a gold edge, and said with a strange laugh, "I will mercifully leave a tube to the 5 old men, but at this price." Ha ha hey hey hey. With the sound of shoes stepping on, the cold and evil marine disappeared at the end of the prison. On the other side, Fujitora led the Marines and rushed back to the warship first, heading towards the outside of Fishman Island. Warship Bow. Fujitora stood quietly, leaning on a brown cane in both hands. Followed by a solemn Vice Admiral. Passerby, Vice Admiral, struggled violently in his heart, made a decision, and said in a deep voice, "Lord Fujitora, it seems that our mission this time is not." "I know," Fujitora interrupted calmly. Vice Admiral was stunned for a moment, then glanced at Fujitora's profile in confusion, nodded, and took a step back. At this moment, the sky suddenly darkened. Vice Admiral looked up, looking at the giant ship floating above his head, his pupils contracted suddenly. Difficulty swallowing his saliva, he said in a trembling voice, "Your Excellency, it seems that we can't go." Vivi, Fujitora's oracle, seemed to have noticed the abnormality. He slowly raised the cane that was leaning on the ground to his chest, held the handle of the knife with his right hand, and bowed slightly. The expression that was originally cloudy and light suddenly became solemn. Vice Admiral didn't pay attention to the change in Fujitora's momentum, and still stared blankly at the sky, looking at the huge hull that almost completely obscured the sunlight, and muttered, "If this ship falls, hundreds of people on Fishman Island will die. Thousands of residents will die because of this." Hearing this, Fujitora's expression suddenly sank, and his aura instantly rose. The warship, which was originally running smoothly on the sea, suddenly lifted into the air and flew towards the huge ship Shadow in the air. Vice Admiral was unsteady and sat down, looking at Fujitora in shock, with a look of fear on his face. "Your Excellency, what are you doing?" The cluttered footsteps sounded, and a group of soldiers rushed to the deck in a panic, looking at the huge black shadow looming in the clouds, Just looking at it, it was like that Vice Admiral, and the shock was incomparable. Fujitora ignored everyone's reaction, manipulated the gravity of the warship, and approached the huge shadow of the ship in the clouds. Everyone in the Fishman Island Plaza also saw the huge shadow of the boat. This is Noah. Isn't the Ark stored at the bottom of the sea? How can it appear above us? Looking at the giant ship that was slowly dragging Fishman Island into the shadows, everyone paled and fell down weakly. Kuntan, who was also shocked beyond words, suddenly shrank his pupils. Under the shadow, he seemed to see a warship. As Fujitora's momentum climbed, the warship rose faster and faster, and everyone was also affected by the heavier air pressure. Pressed down, his whole body was clinging to the board of the boat, gritted his teeth to support him. After a while, Fujitora and the others were less than 100 meters away from the huge ship shadow. Fujitora clenched the sword in his hand, waiting for the moment to strike. 500 meters, 300 meters, 200 meters. Everyone was horrified, and the winner forced their mouths to open their mouths and shouted, "Your Excellency!" Clang! Flashed in front of everyone's eyes, holding the staff knife Fujitora and quickly drawing the knife, pulling out a strange knife flower against the sky, then the body suddenly bowed, and the blade slowly sheathed. There are still 100 meters, and everyone is about to hit the air film above Fishman Island. Everyone swallowed their saliva, and a trace of despair flashed in their eyes. Humming. At this moment, a humming sound rang out, and the huge purple ring lifted off at a high speed, passing through the 2 layers of bubble film of Fishman Island, and directly facing the ancient giant ship shrouded in the huge bubble. Noah, who was slowly pressing down towards Fishman Island, suddenly stopped. On the deck of Noah's Ark, Vanderdecken Ix, who was standing on all fours, had a stiff smile on his face, and the whole person began to float into the air uncontrollably. How can I not control my body? With the increasingly harsh humming sound, Noah's Ark, which was half the size of Fishman Island, was gradually pushed away from the sky above Fishman Island against the current. Fujitora let out a sigh of relief, and Vivi's heavy face eased. All the Marines breathed a sigh of relief. Just a short while later, the huge ship, Noah, was about to hit the outermost bubble on Fishman Island. If they were really broken, then they would have sunk in the deep sea along with Fishman Island. Fishman Square. Watching the huge Noah gradually move away from the sky above Fishman Island, everyone let out a sigh of relief, looking like they were the rest of their lives. The huge bubble ship, Noah's Ark. Noah's giant ship was pushed up several hundred meters by Fujitora's gravitational repulsion. The hull tilted at 45 degrees, almost touching the outer bubble of Fishman Island, and slid toward the dark deep sea. And Vanderdecken Ix, who was wearing a short yellow robe, was pushed out of the hull by the force of repulsion when the giant ship stopped falling. Fortunately, he had a swimming coating on his body, which was the only way he survived. As for whether it will encounter other dangers in the deep sea, it's hard to say. Ding! Congratulations to the host for completing the hidden mission and becoming the guardian of Fishman Island. The completion degree is being tested, please wait. Ding! Defeat the rebels of the new Fishman pirates, completion degree +30. Ding! The ownership of Fishman Island has been changed, former Whitebeard pirates, completion degree +30. Ding! Stop the fall of the Oath boat, completion degree +10, maximum +40. Open black lens bracket rewards are being distributed, please wait. Close black lens bracket. Ding! Congratulations to the host for opening the equipment modification function, rewarding special bait 7. Hey, I can finally fuse the bait. Chapter 36 set off. Go to the new world. Fusion. Chenmu let out a low drink, attracting everyone's attention. Eating and drinking, Luffy and the others all looked at Chenmu in surprise, their heads full of question marks. It's okay, you can continue. Chenmu waved to the crowd. Oh. Luffy and Zoro, who were quickly falling asleep, Chen Mu's mouth twitched, he stopped paying attention, and sank his mind into the system space. Ding! The fusion is successful, congratulations to the host for obtaining Advanced Rainbow Bait 2. Chen Mu was taken aback, Senior. After using so many strange bait, it turns out that there are still high and low. Chen Mu sighed in his heart. Then don't I keep using low-grade bait again? Chen Mu's facial muscles twitched, then shook his head, reorganized his thoughts, and concentrated his thoughts on the bait that flashed with colorful rays of light. Hey, the bait this time is actually a hook like a jade. Advanced Rainbow Bait, unavailable. Close black lens bracket. Chen Mu didn't believe in evil, and he was mad at the colored guyu in the space. Unavailable, the specified fish point has not been reached. Unavailable, the specified fish point has not been reached. Not available, not reached. Well, Chen Mu, admit it. The other side. The rebels who have experienced the life and death of the race with all the residents of Fishman Island are extremely guilty. And Neptune also softened his heart and was willing to release them. But Fishman Street was in ruins and they had nowhere to go. To this end, the blonde and golden-bearded catfish fishman, Minister Zuo proposed, use them to fill the vacant post of the guard. However, considering that the surviving original guards would be grumpy, King Neptune temporarily suppressed this proposal. The people who were full of food and drink were lying on the ground, very comfortable. The naive little Chopper patted his chubby belly with a smile on his face. Suddenly, Chopper sat up suddenly and remembered something very important. Luffy, Zoro, Usopp. Wake up, wake up. Chopper walked back and forth with his short legs. Ran over to shake Luffy for a while, jumped on Zoro and slapped his face, and sometimes jumped on Usopp's back and slammed his head. Ah, it's broken, my neck is about to break, Chopper, stop. Usopp slapped the floor hard and screamed eagerly. Usopp is a long-range output, unlike Luffy Zoro, who is the kind of fighter who can carry and fight. After a while, everyone reluctantly sat up. On Chen Munupton's giant chair, he looked at the people below with a strange expression on his face. Flesh. This was Luffy's unopened eyes. Hiccup tilde. It was a whine burp, which was uttered by Zoro, who had bandaged his eyes. Hey tilde Chopper, tap tap. This is Usopp being treated by Dr. Chopper, putting him in a neck cast. I'm sorry, Usopp. Chopper apologized pitifully to Usopp, two black pearl-like eyes flashing with crystal tears. Like Zoro, Chopper also suffered after effects from his first use of system power. Like Zoro, the Shira mode is basically a killing machine without thinking. And Chopper, on the other hand, is a little bit more sensible, but the power cannot be controlled after the fact. No, Zoro's cheeks had several red hoofprints. Luffy's red waistcoat was also torn into pieces and scattered on the ground. Thinking of this, Chopper suddenly glanced at the two who were still in a foggy state, and breathed a sigh of relief. Chen Mu put his elbows on the armrest and supported his chin, looking at Chopper with some amusing. After a short struggle, everyone finally woke up and said hello to Neptune, who just came back, ready to find the lost partners and set sail again. Chen Mu also jumped lightly and jumped off Neptune's main seat. He walked up to Neptune, raised his head, and said to him, "You can plant another pirate flag." Neptune. Luffy and the others who were also confused, Chen Mu said calmly, "I made a deal with Whitebeard. He promised that after he passed away, I would take care of you Fishman Island for him. As for why I let you guys now planting the pirate flag, you don't understand it." It's not that Chen Mu is hypocritical, but they really don't understand it, because this is the prompt given by the system half an hour ago. Ding! Hody Jones, blood sample has arrived at the Vegapunk laboratory. Close black lens bracket. The second phase of guarding Fishman Island starts to prevent the invasion of marine and pirates. Close black lens bracket. Note: this is a permanent mission. Once Fishman Island is destroyed, it will be counted as mission failure. Close black lens bracket. Chenmu could only helplessly pouted for a mandatory mission without rewards like the system. After all, in the plot of the previous life, the medicine was only stolen and used by Hody, and did not enter the eyes of the dark forces. In this life, because of his existence, the direction of the plot has been changed, attracting the attention of the world's major forces, which also led to this banned drug appearing in their sight. Hey, while Whitebeard can last a few more years, let's quickly put the Straw Hat Pirates in the position of the Fourth Emperor, so that I can relax too. Chenmu Vivi sighed. This person's strength is not bad, he said. That we don't understand, it may be the unique consideration of the strong. Nipton thought for a while, and felt that Chenmu had no need to lie to them, so he opened his mouth to him. Road. Okay, then let's put up that pirate flag. Just use the Straw Hat Pirates. After all, Chenmu walked past Nipton and caught up with the people who were leaving. Neptune was stunned. Grass. Straw Hat Pirate flag. ... Mermaid Bay. Thunder weather. Nami gave a light drink, and launched a thundercloud attack directly against the caribou group who appeared in front of her. A dark cloud slowly floated over the heads of Caribou and the others. Golden lightning flashed through the black cloud, and there were occasional bursts of thunder. With the integration of electric bubbles, the thundercloud is completely formed. Crack! Several bolts of lightning flashed across, slashing hard at Caribou's group. Everyone is still thinking about who tied this beautiful girl who suddenly appeared on their boat. Just when they looked at each other, the violent thunder and lightning slashed straight down, slashing the group of them all black, and the smell of scorching wafted out. Bang, bang, bang. Everyone's eyes turned white, and they fell to the ground one after another with bursts of black smoke all over their bodies. Nami put away the weather stick, clapped her hands, showed a small smile on her face, and said, "Come out, Kami." As Nami's voice fell, the beautiful mermaid with short green hair stretched out her head from behind Nami, looked at the fallen pirates, and patted her chest in relief. "Nami, you've become so powerful too." "Well, of course." Nami shook her hair arrogantly, her face full of pride. Reuniting with a long-lost friend is a pleasure, not to mention getting her compliments. Crash. With the fall of Caribou, several beautiful mermaids who were swallowed by the swamp were thrown out and appeared everywhere on the deck. Kami looked at the sudden appearance of everyone, and her big eyes were suddenly covered with a layer of water mist. "Everyone, it's great to see you all." The fish did not respond, their eyebrows were furrowed, and their little faces were full of pain. "Nami." Kami looked at Nami nervously and signaled her, "Help." Nami looked at it for a while, shook her head gently, and said, "They're fine, just rest for a while, don't worry too much." After speaking, Nami twisted her waist and took brisk small steps, heading towards somewhere in the cabin. Kami glanced suspiciously at the direction where Nami disappeared, then stopped paying attention and hurried to take care of the sisters. At this time, Luffy and others had taken the Dragon Palace, again, led by the great Prince Sharkstar, to the sea forest where Jinbei was located. "Ah, where's Nami?" Luffy, who was sitting on the bow, suddenly slammed his palm, and finally remembered a few companions. Chopper was akimbo, looking at Luffy arrogantly. "HMPH, I already arranged it." After finishing speaking, he glanced proudly at the great Prince Sharkstar. The eldest prince nodded understandingly and said, "Yes, when I was in Dragon Palace just now, Chopper asked me to pass the news for him, saying that you will wait for their return in the Forest of the Sea." "Ah, Chopper, very clever." Usopp grinned Isho and gave Chopper a thumbs up. "Idiot ... even if you praise me, I won't be happy." Chopper's cheeks flushed, and he squeezed his body shyly. On the other side, Chenmu and Zoro came to stand side by side at the stern, and the two chatted without a word. "The knife in your hand is very familiar," Zoro said casually while looking at the scenery outside the ship. Chenmu was taken aback, suddenly remembered the Kuina incident that day, rolled his eyes, shook his head calmly, and said, "This knife was stolen from Marine yesterday." Zoro frowned, looking at Chenmu with doubts in his eyes. "Marine?" "Yes," Chenmu nodded calmly. Chenmu obviously did not want to entangle more on this topic, turned around and walked towards the cabin. However, Zoro flickered and stood in front of Chenmu, and said lightly, "Fight with me." Chenmu didn't answer, and walked towards Zoro's left side expressionlessly, trying to get around him. Clang! The word Hidao on the white hilt was unsheathed in an instant and lay in front of Chenmu. "Why, can you frighten Admiral Fujitora, but dare not accept my challenge?" Zoro turned his head, and a cold light flashed in his eyes. Chenmu sighed helplessly and said, "I only have one move, if you can catch it. I will lose." Madness. Zoro glared at him, a trace of anger flashed in his eyes, and he gritted his teeth. "Good." After speaking, he turned around and took a few steps back, put the word Hidao to his mouth, and bit it. Then at the same time, Chu Shui and the 3 generations of ghosts were pulled out, and looked at Chenmu solemnly. Seeing that Zoro was ready to fight, Chenmu slowly turned around, holding Jinghua Shui's left hand and bending his elbow to charge. The tone was slow and low. Ordinary, normal, cut, hit. Having said that, he held the left hand of the hilt and headed straight towards Zoro's hammer. Zoro was surprised. The excellent observation Haki made him subconsciously choose to avoid it. Boom! The blasting fist swept across Zoro's cheek, blasting the roof of the ship behind him. Chopper, who were leisurely drinking tea in the cabin, spat out the tea in fright. In the blink of an eye, the fist wind shot straight into the sky, instantly blasting a giant hole out of the 2 layers of bubble film covering Fishman Island. Endless sea water began to pour in. Exclamation mark. The eldest prince stared dumbfounded at the giant hole in the sky and the sea water that was pouring in frantically. He suddenly woke up and hurriedly took out the phone bug. "Hey, father, hurry up, open the gas storage," the eldest prince hurriedly urged. Huh. Obviously, a certain king was drinking at this time and did not understand what his son said. "Open the gas storage, or Fishman Island will disappear." The eldest prince was extremely anxious at this time, and his naive father, the king, was actually very drunk at this critical juncture. "This is really dying." Fishman Island began to sink gradually as the seawater poured in. Just when everyone didn't know what to do, a huge air bubble was created from the entrance, gradually merged into the air layer, and slowly filled the 2 huge holes that were broken. Everyone let out a sigh of relief. The eldest prince glanced at the bubble layer at the end of the sky with lingering fears. In the phone bug that had not hung up, there was a conversation between the angry minister of the left and the humble father. The conversation is as follows. "Your Majesty, what are you doing? Do you know that it's only a matter of time before we sink into the underwater volcanoes?" "I'm sorry, I'm drunk." "No, you don't need to apologize." The old minister was in a hurry. "How disrespectful you are to your Majesty, please punish me." Hiccup ... It's alright. You just saved Fishman Island. No punishment, no punishment. "Well, that old minister thanks your Majesty for your forgiveness." After a pause, Minister Zuo bowed again and said, "Since your Majesty has decided to forgive the sin of disrespect of the old minister, then the old minister will dare to be the master again. Guards, the order goes on, from now on, His Majesty the King will stop drinking. No more fine wines can appear in the Dragon Palace." "Yes. Me. Does your Majesty have anything to add?" "No, no more." At this point, the eldest prince hung up the phone with a speechless expression. Compared with his own foolish father and king, he still felt that Minister Zuo was more reliable. Then he sighed and said, "It seems that if you want to drink in the future, you can't drink it in Dragon Palace City." This is a small episode on the way to the Forest of the Sea. After this incident, Zoro chose to treat Chen Emu's behavior in silence. Soon, everyone came to the Forest of the Sea and met Jinbei and his long-arrived friends. New World, here we come. Chapter 37 Jinbei joins. Forest of the Sea, sunny. Jinbei crossed his arms and sat cross-legged on the green grass in the middle. Luffy sat opposite him, with a reunion smile on his face. "Jinbei, be my partner." Standing behind Luffy stopped talking to each other and looked at the blue-skinned fish man indifferently. Jinbei was thoughtful and did not directly agree or reject Luffy. Obviously, he had his own thoughts. Today, he has lost the title of Shichibukai, and only relying on Whitebeard's protection can only stop the invasion of pirates. If one day, the Whitebeard pirates were dragged down and other forces took the opportunity to attack Fishman Island, the consequences would be unimaginable. Besides, Whitebeard is getting old. The battle 2 years ago also aggravated his injuries, and there are even rumors that Whitebeard has at most 5 years to live. If Whitebeard falls, then Fishman will really become a piece of fish to be slaughtered. Therefore, Jinbei is now thinking about how to keep Fishman Island, or how to attach himself to a powerful force and obtain shelter for Fishman Island. Although Luffy likes him, but he's not alone. There is this huge country behind it, with countless people. After all, in the eyes of those dark forces, the beautiful mermaids are moving mountains of gold. Jinbei, Jinbei, Jinbei. Seeing that he didn't reply for a long time, Luffy turned Jinbei's arms and shook it vigorously. Seeing the naive attitude of their own captain, everyone held their foreheads without looking at. After a brief recollection, Chenmu figured out what Jinbei was thinking at this time. He said calmly, "Jinbei, at the entrance of Fishman Island, in addition to the Whitebeard pirate flag, the Straw Hat pirate flag is also planted. Do you know about this?" The Straw Hat pirate flag is planted at the entrance. Shouldn't it only be the Whitebeard pirate flag? After Jinbei thought about it, he couldn't figure it out. Everyone also looked at Chenmu with a questioning expression, waiting for his next words. Chenmu Isho looked at Luffy and said, "At that time, you all went too fast. You only heard that I wanted Neptune to plant the flag, but you missed the most important conversation later." Seeing that the pressure and curiosity of the crowd were getting stronger and stronger, Chenmu was no longer selling off, and said directly, "Whitebeard asked me to tell Neptune. From now on, the guardian of Fishman Island will be him and the Straw Hat Sea. The band of thieves will take care of it together." Hearing this, everyone didn't feel anything at first. It was nothing more than protecting an area with Whitebeard. And, most of the time, they're just soy sauce. But I always felt that there was something in this sentence, so they frowned and thought about it carefully. The first to understand is Robin and Nami, who are in charge of IQ. The two looked at each other with a hint of surprise in their eyes. In this conversation, the hidden mystery is alliance. Nami even covered her mouth slightly, looking like she couldn't believe it. The two Suotian, who are thick on the outside and thin on the inside, also discovered the abnormality of Nami. Robin and cast an inquiring look to the two. Robin glanced at the two of them, forcibly calmed down his excitement, and opened his mouth to everyone. Everyone. Everyone raised their heads and looked at her suspiciously. The 4 emperors have invited us to form an alliance. Everyone tilted their heads in confusion at first, and then suddenly woke up. Like thunder blasting in their ears, everyone who came up with the keywords gradually widened their eyes. Usopp looked at Robin dumbfounded. Four emperors. Chopper, Brook, Tai. Allies. Sanji, who was the first to manage his expression, silently lit a cigarette, looked at the scenery outside the boat, and slowly exhaled a smoke ring. Zoro didn't do much. Luffy looked at Robin with a puzzled look. Is that old dad of Ace? Why did he form an alliance with me? I don't know. Oh, but I don't know about it. The expressions of everyone's surprise turned to joy instantly stiffened and solidified. Turning his head stiffly, he fixed his gaze on Chenmu. After listening to Robin's analysis, Chenmu, the party involved, was also stunned and thought. Is that what Whitebeard thinks? I don't know. Afterwards, he noticed the gazes of everyone looking at him. The thought faded, a soft smile filled his face again. He nodded to everyone, and said, well, I agreed for Luffy. Everyone turned their heads and looked at Luffy with a questioning face. Ah, if it's the uncle, if you agree, then I'll form an alliance with that old man. After speaking, Luffy put his hands on his hips and looked at everyone with a smile. Usopp raised the chopper and turned it around twice, with a weeping expression on his face, and muttered, that's great, that's great. We will also be a pirate group backed by the 4 emperors in the future. Yeah, Chopper narrowed his eyes with a smile, his 2 deer hooves waving non-stop in the air. After turning around a few times, Usopp put the chopper down, turned his head to look at the heavy-faced people, and said, huh? What's wrong with you guys? Chopper also looked at everyone with a puzzled expression. As far as he knew, this was something that made the deer happy, so why did everyone suddenly become unhappy? At this time, Sanji took his last puff, flicked the cigarette butt overboard, his eyes were a little erratic, and he whispered softly, do we have that strength? Usopp still didn't grasp the point, and explained eagerly, hey, Sanji, don't talk nonsense, we are an alliance, not an enemy. Speaking of this, Usopp, who gradually understood the truth, suddenly shrank his pupils. Robin said affirmatively, yes, our enemies in the future will be at the level of the 4 emperor pirates. The crowd was silent. Suocean, who were the main 3, walked into the kitchen with one of their hands in their pockets, while the other sat on the ground indifferently, holding a white cloth in his hand, and wiped the 3 beloved knives one by one. Then he got up and walked to the training room. Looking at the people who suddenly fell silent, Chenmu shook his head helplessly and said, it's true. Hurry up. Just then, Jinbei spoke up. Luffy, the old man is willing to join. Luffy was stunned for a moment, then looked at him with joy, and kept saying things like, great. Jinbei. Nami looked at Jinbei with a determined face, and a mist of water gradually appeared in her beautiful eyes. Chenmu greeted Jinbei with kindness to Isho, saying hello to this new partner. I really don't treat myself as an outsider. At this moment, Nami suddenly walked up to the 2nd floor, looked at everyone with a determined face, clapped her hands, attracted everyone's attention, and said, it's about to enter the deep sea, everyone, get ready. At this moment, Jinbei threw a brown object similar to a wristwatch at Nami and said, Nami, use this is a specific pointer for the new world. Nami caught it and opened her palm to look. The only difference from the pointers used in the past was that there were 2 more pointers. Yes, this is a specific pointer for the new world. It will point to 3 islands at the same time, and according to the frequency of the pointer shaking, it can judge the danger of arriving on the island. After Nami heard Jinbei's introduction, she subconsciously wanted to throw this thing away. Jinbei looked at Nami with a puzzled expression, not understanding why a navigator would reject the existence of a recording pointer. Ha ha. Just then, Luffy laughed. Jinbei turned his head to look, only to see Luffy's eyes lit up suddenly, his neck quickly stretched, and he was entangled towards Nami on the 2nd floor. Smiled and said, Nami, I'll go to that place if I want. Nami's face was full of horror, shaking her head desperately. Hey, Luffy, calm down for me. Guessing Luffy's thoughts, Usopp grabbed Luffy's neck angrily and dragged him off Nami. No, I'm the captain, and I'm going there. After a pause, he smiled at Nami. Nami, you will deliver us safely, right? Hearing this, Nami froze all over, slowly lowered her head, and made a sound like a mosquito moan. Nami. Usopp opened his mouth weakly, but did not continue. Not long after, the Sunny officially left Fishman Island through the huge circular stone gate. Frankie also took out several special square wooden blocks from the boat, connected them in series, and threw them out of the boat to use as the power buoyancy to rise. At this time, Chen Mu slumped on the bed, all weak, and muttered to himself, "I can go ashore in the future, but I will definitely not go aboard." Chen Mu slowly closed his eyes, but a beautiful mermaid with a huge body suddenly appeared in his mind. Chapter 38 Rainbow Fishing Spot appears. On the sea at this time, several huge warships formed an encirclement, waiting for Luffy and others to surface. On the warship at the forefront, Smoker, who was wearing a marine coat, held a cigar in his mouth and held a weapon made of sea stone, 10 hands. Quietly waiting for Luffy and the others to appear. "Luffy, this time, I won't let you run away again." Smoker can't help but recall the battle 2 years ago. In that brutal fight, Onagumo, one of the 16 Vice Admiral, was punched and killed by Luffy, shocking everyone present. However, these people did not include him. Even if Luffy has the strength to kill Vice Admiral, he is not afraid. Because in the past several battles, the one with the straw hat was always the one who finally escaped. His weakness. Smoker knew it. Smoker, whose thoughts drifted away, heard the sound of light footsteps behind him, but he did not turn back, because he knew that there was one person in the whole ship who could have such light footsteps. Tashigi walked slowly to Smoker's side, pulled back the hair on his temples that had been blown away by the sea breeze, and said softly, "These pirates who escaped from Fishman Island, can you believe what they say?" Smoker exhaled a thick ring of smoke, smacked his mouth, and said firmly, "I just need to know that they will come out of Fishman Island, that's enough." The record lightly to Tashigi, and said, "From what I know about him, he will definitely choose to go to the most dangerous, Thunder Island, and here is the only way for them to pass." Quote. Tashigi caught the recording pointer with both hands, looking at a pointer that was shaking violently, her eyebrows furrowed tightly, and a trace of worry flashed in her eyes. "Well, cheer up, they should be almost there." On the other side, in the deep sea of silence, several huge driftwood blocks, using a special hemp rope, connect the driftwood together. Under the head of the little lion tied to the Sunny, Luffy and the others were led and floated towards the sea. At this moment, a rapidly rotating white current appeared, winding past like a white snake. Coincidentally, this white current, which leads nowhere, just appeared above the driftwood block. The driftwood cubes were pulled into the high-speed rotating ocean currents one after another, stirring rapidly inside, and even pulling the Sunny into it. Also rotated and accelerated in the direction of the current going. Everyone was dizzy, and grabbed the fixtures around them to ensure that they would not be thrown out of the boat. Fortunately, the quality of the giant bubble coral presented by Fishman Island is hard enough to create bubbles that are not damaged by the current. Otherwise, the people who had just gathered for a while would be forced to separate again. The crowd gritted their teeth and stood up. But in the cabin, there was a man surnamed Chen who was thrown down, and that would be miserable. After a while, Jinbei, who is Fishman, seized the right moment, grabbed the chaotic giant cube with one hand, and rushed out of the rapid ocean current. Jinbei, who was holding on to the hemp rope, was dragged along by the Sunny in the current. After walking a short distance, Jinbei saw a group of reefs ahead. The sea current channel that meanders like a white snake passes through the huge deep-sea reefs. Jinbei, who is traveling with the boat, finally finds the opportunity to save everyone from getting out. When he was about to hit the huge reef, Jinbei quickly completed the armament hardening with both hands, and with the power of going, his left hand was like a knife, and he slammed into the reef fiercely. Although the force of the current dragged him forward, a long ravine was carved into the outer wall of the reef. But the serious-looking Jinbei also used the slight resistance provided by the reef to complete the greeting that he had been able to accumulate for a long time. The muscles on the right arm covered by Jinbei armament swelled, and a majestic force burst out, and the right hand holding the special hemp rope slammed. Ocean current, one-handed over the shoulder throw. As the pendulum clock turned, the Sunny was instantly thrown out of the ocean current channel, breaking through the pressure of the jet stream, and lacing toward the top. Jinbei, who had already let go of his right hand, took a breath, and with his feet on the reef, he swam quickly in the direction of Luffy and the others. ... Wow! A wave of dozens of meters high was startled on the calm sea. The Sunny, wrapped in bubbles, burst out of the water, broke through the sea, and was bathed in the sun again. ... On the boat, everyone was sitting or lying together, and their faces were exhausted. Only Luffy looked at Jinbei with a smirk, with a squinted look. Jinbei, thanks to you this time, Usopp said weakly, lying on the ground. Well, this is what this old man should do, Jinbei replied lightly with a thoughtful expression. As a mature middle-aged fishman, Jinbei has always maintained a prudence in line with his age. He. Luffy still looked at Jinbei with a smile on his face, obviously very satisfied with the addition of this new partner. On the other side, Nami supported the white guardrail on the second floor and stood up slowly, occasionally a trace of discomfort flashed on her pretty little face. Looking at the pointer on her wrist, Nami's brows furrowed tightly. Nami, what's wrong? Robin, who was sitting on the stairs, noticed Nami's strangeness and asked softly. Nami lowered her head, shook her head slightly, and said, our current position is strange. Everyone was stunned for a moment, and all turned to look at Nami on the second floor. Strange. Chopper sat on the soft grass, tilted his head, and looked at Nami. Nami was silent for a moment, then sighed softly and said slowly to the crowd, the pointers point in 3 directions. After a pause, after glancing at everyone, he continued, the pointers in the 3 directions are shaking violently. Quote! Chopper, Usopp, and Brook leaned their heads together, looking overly frightened. Oh, I see. That is to say, no matter what we choose, we will reach the dangerous area. Frankie groaned while rubbing his chin. Yeah, Nami nodded worriedly. The atmosphere suddenly became heavy. At this moment, the door was pushed, and Chenmu appeared in front of everyone. I saw him leaning against the door frame weakly, looking at everyone with a pale face, and said intermittently, how long will it take us to reach the next island? Everyone Vivi was stunned for a moment, and looked at Nami again. Nami pursed her lips, but did not speak. Nami. Seeing Nami's tangled face, Usopp couldn't help but said. But as soon as the words came out, they were interrupted by Jinbei. This is the windless zone. Jinbei opened his eyes slowly, his tone a little heavy. Everyone. Nami took a deep breath, nodded to everyone, and said, Jinbei's judgment is right. The problem we are facing now is not which island to land on, but how to get out of this windless zone. Just when everyone was at a loss, Chenmu's mind sounded a system prompt. Ding! Found a new fish spot. You can use the bait. Advanced rainbow bait. Chapter 39 Talents are emerging. On the sea. A huge warship was docked firmly on the sea, just above the exit of Fishman Island. Admiral wearing marine coats stood quietly at the bow of the boat. The 3 people with different ideas did not communicate too much. At this time, Vice Admiral Momonga, who closed his eyes and meditated, slowly opened his eyes, ignoring the gazes of the other 9 vice admirals, and walked towards the 3 admirals who were standing silently. The 3 gentlemen. Momonga stopped 5 meters behind the 3 of Kizaru, and said with a serious face. Oh. Kizaru raised his eyebrows, turned around slightly suspiciously, and looked at Vice Admiral who was bowing and nodding. Fujitora's expression didn't change, still leaning on a cane in both hands, looking into the distance. A look of displeasure flashed across Akainu's face. He just tilted his head, and glanced at the middle standing respectfully behind him. His tone was a bit cold. Speak. Receiving Admiral Akainu's signal, Momonga raised her head symbolically, but did not dare to look directly at the Admiral, and said calmly, I received a report just now that Vice Admiral Smoker of the G5 branch is at the third exit of Fishman Island. One of the entrances to Thunder Island did not block the Straw Hat Pirates and others. Pause. He found that the Admiral did not intend to interrupt, and continued. He suspected that Luffy and others went to the least dangerous Punk Hassad, and applied to go alone, and also said. Momonga paused after speaking, and did not continue to speak. He was fascinated by what he was listening to, but found that there was suddenly no sound behind him. Akainu turned around suddenly, a trace of anger flashed in his eyes, and said in a somewhat impatient tone, what else did he say? Hurry up. Momonga pursed her lips, and after a brief hesitation, she said it. He said that he would personally go to Punk Hassad to hunt down the Straw Hat Pirates. In order to prevent accidental regeneration, we must go to the entrance of another island to ambush. After that, he did not give me a chance to reply, and chose to hang up. Disconnect. HMPH, arrogant. Akainu frowned angrily. Fujitora also turned around slowly, the sticks in both hands slammed against the ground, and cracks appeared on the hard board. Kizaru took a step to the side, dodged the cracks that spread over, and said with a face full of teasing, you destroy the warship without permission, but you have to compensate yourself. Seeing that Fujitora didn't answer, Kizaru shrugged angrily, turned his head to look at Momonga, and said, tell him that the entrance to the other island is guarded by him, Punk Hassad. The three of us Admiral will personally go. Saying that, Kizaru turned around leisurely and muttered in a low voice, it's just Vice Admiral, it's really courting death. Yes. Momonga nodded and saluted to the three of them, then turned around and went to the communication room alone. Other 9 Vice Admiral looked at their noses and hearts, as if they didn't hear Kizaru's whispers. Without him, because it hurts the dignity of Vice Admiral too much. The Vice Admiral secretly pouted and complained inwardly. Vice Admiral is just Vice Admiral, and I have to add the word mere. Why, we don't be ashamed. Kizaru didn't know the mental activities of the crowd. Akainu waved at the hate, and said in an unquestionable tone, divert. Go to Punk Hassad. Yes, the generals and soldiers replied loudly. At the same time, in the sky not far away, a figure like a wandering dragon, under the cover of layers of clouds and mist, moved forward rapidly. Sunny. When everyone heard that they were in the windless belt, they were all speechless. The atmosphere became extremely heavy for a while. After a short rest, the dizziness in everyone's mind gradually disappeared, except for Chen Mu. Usopp said to Frankie beside him, can you use the wind to shoot? Frankie shook his head. No, every time you use the wind cannon, you need 3 barrels of coke, and the maximum distance is only 1 kilometer. Then let's use it a few more times. Before Usopp could finish speaking, he was interrupted by Nami shaking his head. No, the windless belt has a large number of sea kings, and the wind cannon needs to be used at the most critical time. Jinbei took Nami's words at this time, and said in a flat tone, the old man made a rough observation just now. The coverage of this windless belt is at least 50 kilometers. Or more. It's over. Everyone's heart froze, their eyes gradually lost focus, and they became decadent. Nami also frowned, with a frowning look on her face. Jinbei, you can pull. Luffy put his hands on his hips and slapped Jinbei's arms non-stop, with an excited expression. No, Jinbei still stared at Navigator Nami on the 2nd floor, and refused in a flat tone. Ah, Jinbei. Luffy sat down and looked down at Jinbei with snot and tears. Everyone was speechless. Jinbei's mouth twitched even more, and he felt extremely resentful about Luffy's behavior of persuading him to get off the ship, and he was full of slander in his heart. At this moment, Chen Yu, who really couldn't hold it, walked to the edge of the boat with a look of Jinghuashuiyu in one hand. It's just the pale color on his face that hasn't completely faded away, proving that he is the most seasick person. Everyone still frowned and thought hard, not paying attention to Chen, who had already taken out his fishing rod and started fishing. Ding! Fishing starts. Advanced rainbow bait is in use. Please wait patiently. 1 minute, 3 minutes, 10 minutes, an hour passed. Just when Chen Yu couldn't help but lift the table, the long-lost system prompt finally rang. Ding! Congratulations to the host for obtaining the innate ability, Sea King. Close black lens bracket. Talent ability, Neptune. Chen Yu was a little surprised by the emerging term of talent ability. After Saitama's constitution reached the full level, he had no chance to improve his strength. The system tasks and rewards were all to help others increase their strength. Today, it's finally my turn. Macho tears. Chen Yu calmed down and sank his mind into the system. After an endless search, Chen Yu gave up his plan to look for a personal panel, and secretly despised this system, which didn't even have a personal information bar. It was really backward. Then, after thinking about it, he hid his mind in the storage space. Looking at the scattered items, they were randomly placed in the huge storage compartment of 100x100. Chen Yu couldn't help but twitch at the corners of his mouth. Stand up. Then he looked down, and in the bottom corner, lower right corner, he found a white card. Chen Yu casually clicked. This piece of white paper, which had been folded several times, flew out of the storage compartment and slowly unfolded in front of Chen Yu. Vivre card. Chen Yu looked at the 3 large black characters on the white piece of paper, and was stunned. What do I want this thing for? Confused, Chen Yu ran his mind and clicked again on the white piece of paper floating in the system space. Who tilde? A slight cry sounded, and the paper slowly rotated, revealing the information on the back to Chen Mu's eyes. Constitution. Max, level 1000. Ability. Sea King, level 1/5. These 2 pieces of information only occupy the upper half of the white paper, which is 1/5 of the area, and the rest is blank. After reading these 2 pieces of worthless information, Chen Yu silently exited the system space. During Chen Mu's hour-long fishing time, everyone discussed several possibilities one after another, but they were all rejected one by one. Although they occasionally paid attention to Chen Yu, they never said much to this outsider. After all, he paid. Just when everyone was thinking hard again, Chen Yu jumped lightly, jumped onto the white guardrail along the boat, clapped his hands to everyone, and said, "Everyone, I have a solution." Chapter 40 Avoid War. Sunny. Chen Yu stood on the white guardrail, trying to control his facial expressions, trying to make the smile on his face look more natural. Today is the first day of trying to overcome seasickness, starting with boycotting, looking through the looking glass. Everyone turned their heads and looked at Chen Yu, who pretended to be calm with a stiff smile on his face, and looked at his white cloak blown by the sea breeze, his eyes filled with doubts. The muscles on Chen Mu's face trembled, and he forcibly pulled out a like spring breeze smile, and said to everyone, "Everyone, I have a way to get out of this windless zone." Everyone was stunned for a moment, and then looked at Chen Yu with a hint of pity. Seasickness is not a disease, but a person with severe hallucinations like him still needs treatment. Usopp clutched his forehead, shook his head and sighed, "Chopper, please excuse me." Yeah. Chopper looked at Chen Yu with a stern face, walked towards him with his short legs, and comforted him while walking. "Uncle, come down quickly, I will cure you." The corners of Chen Mu's eyes twitched, and black lines hung on his forehead. Everyone watched Chopper approach Chen Yu, so they stopped paying attention and continued to lower their heads to think about countermeasures. Shish! Suddenly, a long hiss came into everyone's ears. Everyone raised their heads in confusion, looking for Chen Yu, who was looking towards the ship's edge. I saw that his right thumb and index finger were pinching his lower lip, and he was blowing hard, his cheeks flushed, which made everyone more confused, and at the same time, Chopper looked at the patient with worry. Usopp blinked at first, then seemed to think of something, pointed his left index finger at Chenmu, and said to Frankie beside him, "Did he want to whistle?" Frankie nodded solemnly, with a heavy, in his tone. Thank goodness, someone finally saw through his stubbornness. Chenmu gave Usopp a thumbs up in his heart. "Uncle," Chopper called Chenmu softly with worry written all over his face. Before he finished speaking, Chenmu fell behind him. In the blink of an eye, Chenmu fell straight into the sea in front of everyone, and the white spray splashed against the white guardrail. Then it spread out, half of it fell back into the sea, and the other half remained on the turf-covered shipboard, with pearlescent shimmers. This idiot, Sanji's eyes twitched. He propped up the guardrail with one hand and flicked the cigarette away with the other, and was about to jump down to save someone. However, Sanji's figure suddenly stopped, and he suddenly took a step back. At the same time, he put his arms in front of him and assumed a defensive stance. Everyone was confused and planned to ask him, but they were attracted by the sudden, crashing sound, and they all turned their heads and looked to the side of the boat. Wow! A white giant wave dozens of meters high rolled up, and the height was almost photographed against the mainmast. It is conceivable how huge this giant wave was. After a brief panic, everyone who passed through all kinds of strong winds and waves quickly made a defensive stance. Anyway, the boat won't capsize, they just need to make sure that they don't get hit by the waves. Clap. The giant wolf overturned and slapped heavily on the crowd and the board of the boat. The Sunny shook violently for a while, and after the waves subsided, it gradually stabilized. The people lying on the ground shook their heads and slowly got up from the ground. Nami rubbed her shoulders, which were hurt by the waves, and looked out of the boat. I saw Chenmu clasping his chest with his arms, and with a contented expression, he was slowly rising from the outside of the boat. The people who were relieved also noticed that Chenmu, who was slowly rising out of the boat, slowly turned from looking up at the beginning. When Chenmu's height was higher than the main mast, everyone was able to fully understand the huge figure under his feet. This is a very large whale. The length of its surface is as long as 3 sunnies, and its height directly exceeds the main mast. Its huge body blocks the sunlight above everyone's heads. Everyone was in a shadow. Hey guys, this is how I say it. Did you see it? Chenmu's shouts came from above everyone's heads, and before everyone could answer, Chenmu's voice rang again. Frankie, I'll let the whale open its mouth, you get a rope, put it around its teeth, and I'll let it drag us along. Also, I won't go down anymore. When the time comes to change the route, you just need Nami to inform me. Knowing that Chenmu's voice had fallen, everyone slowly retreated from the state of shock. He can actually summon a sea king. Everyone was shocked and looked at this behemoth in disbelief. Frankie entered the control room, opened the 2 square windows under the little lion's head, and shut out 2 black hard and thick iron chains. The huge ring at the top of the chains just caught the smallest back molar of the whale. Crash. As the whale's mouth closed, the waves swelled, pushing the Sunny to sway again. In this way, everyone set sail again, heading for the nearest island. Why did she choose the nearest island to land on? Nami was also very helpless, because the frequency of the crazy shaking of the 3 pointers is almost the same, which means that no matter which one they choose, it is very dangerous. So I chose the nearest island. On the other side, the huge warship sailing towards Punk Hassad slowly stopped on the sea. All the vice admiral stood at the bow of the boat, staring sternly at the huge sailboat coming on the opposite side. This is the fleet of the Revolutionary Army. Momonga narrowed his eyes slightly, and a sharp flash flashed in his eyes. Yeah, Vice Admiral Yamakaji, biting his cigar and keeping his usual smile, nodded calmly. Revolutionary Fleet. A pitch-black crow hovered over the main mast and fell towards the figure in black below. A tall and thin man with a black feather coat and a beak-like tool over his mouth slowly raised his arm and caught the crow, pushing towards him. After a brief eye contact, the black-feathered man waved his arm, and the black-feathered crow was like a drop of water falling into the sea, naturally blending into his pitch-black feathered coat. Northern Army, exuding a gloomy aura, narrowed his eyes and looked at the warship in the distance, his tone somewhat icy. There are 10 vice-admirals, and it seems that there are still admiral hidden among them. After a pause, he looked at the sexy woman wearing a red high-top hat, a red waistcoat, and a long tail skirt, and added lightly, "Are you going to fight?" Bello Betty, the commander of the East Army, with a cigarette in the corner of his mouth, pulled down the black-rimmed red-bottomed sunglasses, glanced at the crow, and snorted disdainfully. Just let them go this time. After all, the slim waist without any fat turned around and walked towards the cabin. Everyone obeys orders, avoids war, and diverts flight. Yes. The huge sailboat suddenly changed its course and went to the other side. On the warship, the 10 middle brows frowned, looking at the sailing ships that were about to leave. Their expressions were very dignified. At this moment, Akainu's voice sounded behind everyone. "Aim all artillery and prepare to attack." Yes. The soldiers gave a military salute, and then rushed to the artillery depot under the deck. Revolutionary Army, it's really troublesome. Kizaru yawned and walked slowly to Akainu's side. Unhurriedly, just now, Master Ching. Marshal called us and asked us to abandon this operation and go directly to the Holy Land Mariajoy. Looking at Akainu who was still fighting, Kizaru pouted and added, "It was the order of those 5. What? Akainu turned his head suddenly, his eyes fixed on Kizaru. "It's so scary don't look at me like that. This is a military order, and I don't dare to change it at will." Facing Akainu's glare, Kizaru raised his hands mockingly. Although he said it was terrible, his expression showed no trace of fear. Then he turned around, and in an unquestionable tone, he said to the stupid soldier, "Diversion, Holy Land Mariajoy." Yes. The soldier was stunned for a moment, then glanced at Akainu, who frowned and said nothing, and ran to the control room upstairs. Fleets of the 2 sides were diverted, and several top leaders of Marine and the Revolutionary Army just missed it. Shortly after the fleets of the 2 sides left, a Marine rescue boat, carrying Admiral Akainu and 4 soldiers, rushed to Punk Hasad not far away. And when they landed on the island, they found that it was not the Straw Hat Pirates who greeted them, but an extremely dangerous person.